Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I have always had trouble putting this story into words, but I'll give it a shot. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I were backpacking through Europe in late November and early December. It was off-season for travel, and that meant quiet towns, empty hostels, and a strange kind of solitude that you only experience when you're wandering through places that thrive on tourism but have been abandoned for the winter. We arrived late one night in a famous ski resort town in Austria. The train ride had been long, the day exhausting, and all we wanted was to check into our hostel, put our bags down, and get some rest. But when we arrived at the hostel, we found a notice on the door. It was closed for renovations and wouldn't be open until later in December. There was no prior warning, no emails or calls, just a locked door and a sign that left us standing in the freezing night air with our backpacks and no place to stay. This was when we realized the true meaning of the off-season. Everything was closed. Not just our hostel, but nearly every hotel, restaurant, and shop in the town. There were no people on the streets, no lights in the windows, nothing but the sound of the wind rushing through the empty resort. The whole town felt abandoned. We wandered for a while, desperately looking for somewhere to stay. It took hours, but we eventually found a small replacement hotel that was still open. By this time, my girlfriend had started feeling sick. She had been coming down with a fever since the night before, and the exhaustion from the travel only made it worse. We stayed the night in that hotel, but in the morning, we had to figure out what to do for the rest of our time in Austria. The only available place was a hostel in a remote part of town. It was further away from everything, but we didn't have many options. So we packed up our things and headed there. When we arrived, I was struck by how idyllic the place looked. It was the perfect Austrian travel lodge, an old building with wooden balconies, large windows, and a cozy atmosphere. The inside was just as charming. The furniture was rustic, the floors creaked underfoot, and the entire place had a warm, welcoming feel to it. At first, it seemed like we had found a hidden gem. Because it was the off-season, we were the only guests there. This was something we were used to at this point in our trip, but it still felt strange. The hostel was large, meant to accommodate many travelers, but for the next few nights, it was just us. The reception staff was there during the day, but they left in the evenings, locking up the front door and leaving the whole building to us. We spent most of our time inside because we were both sick. The flu had hit us hard, and between the fever and the fatigue, we barely had the energy to go out. When we did, we took slow walks through the surrounding mountains, marveling at how beautiful and quiet everything was. The crisp air, the snow-covered peaks, and the absolute silence. It was peaceful during the day. But at night, the atmosphere changed. The town was dead silent after dark. It got dark early, around 5 p.m., and after that, it felt like the entire place ceased to exist. No cars, no voices, no signs of life. Just an empty ski town waiting for the season to start again. On our last night there, we decided to take it easy. The receptionist left at 6 p.m., locking the front door as usual. We spent most of the evening in bed, resting and trying to recover. Around 10 p.m., we got up to eat something before going back to sleep. My girlfriend went back to bed after, and I decided to stay up for a little while and watch TV in our room. The hostel was completely silent. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the TV and got ready for bed. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, just a sound drifting up from downstairs. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but as I listened closer, I realized it was singing. A slow, melodic voice, carrying through the halls of the empty hostel. I froze. I knew we were alone. There was no one else staying here, no staff at night, no other guests. But someone or something was downstairs singing. I pressed my ear against the door. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't just singing, it was opera, or some kind of chanting. The kind of eerie, drawn-out notes that you only hear in old recordings or strange rituals. Panic started creeping in. My mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe a cleaning staff member had come in late? But why would they be playing opera music in the middle of the night? I had seen enough horror movies to know that when you hear unexplained chanting in an empty building, it never ends well. I forced myself to stay calm and tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just exhausted. But then I heard footsteps. They weren't coming from the hallway outside our room, but they were inside the building. Slow, deliberate steps. Not the soft shuffle of someone moving around casually, but careful, heavy steps. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I woke my girlfriend up, my voice shaking as I told her what I was hearing. She sat up immediately, alarmed. We both pressed our ears to the door, listening. The music had stopped, but the footsteps hadn't. They were coming from somewhere below us, moving around. I had no idea what to do. We had to check out in the morning, so we couldn't just run. But every instinct in my body was telling me we needed to leave. And then, the singing started again. This time, it was louder, clearer, like someone had stepped closer to the stairs, like they wanted to be heard. The voice was deep, almost hypnotic, the kind of sound that made your skin crawl. That was it. We were leaving. We grabbed our backpacks, already mostly packed, and moved towards the door as quietly as possible. Every sound felt magnified in the silence. I told my girlfriend to hold her backpack in front of her in case someone tried to attack us. I didn't know who or what was downstairs, but I wasn't taking any chances. We slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. The music was still coming from downstairs. We moved down the hall, towards the stairs. As we reached the top of the stairs, I saw where the music was coming from. The dining hall. We kept going, step by step, barely breathing. The front door was just ahead. If we could reach it, we'd be out. Then, as I turned the key in the lock, the door let out a loud creak. And from the dining hall, there was a sudden, sharp noise. A chair scraping against the floor. And then, a voice. Not singing, not chanting, but a deep, angry shout. At the same moment, my girlfriend let out a terrified scream. We didn't wait. We ran. The door swung open, and we bolted into the cold night. We didn't stop running until we reached the railway station. We waited there until the first train out of town, sitting in the dimly lit bar, trying to process what had just happened. To this day, I have no idea who was in that hostel with us, what they were doing, or what would have happened if we had stayed. But I do know one thing: I will never, ever go back. It was a Friday night, and my friend's house was buzzing with life. The kind of life that makes you forget, even for a moment, that the place is haunted. We'd all been there before, me, Mike, a few other friends, and my buddy's family. We knew the stories. We'd seen the shadows, heard the footsteps, felt the cold spots that didn't make sense. Even his kid, no older than 2, would point to empty corners and say, "Old man." It was part of the house, like the creaky floorboards or the drafty windows. You just got used to it, or at least you tried to. The party was in full swing. The grill was smoking, the beer was flowing, and the backyard was packed with people laughing and talking. The house itself was a split level, with a sliding glass door that led from the den to the patio. The blinds were open, so you could see straight through to the lamp in the den, casting a warm glow. It was one of those nights where everything felt normal, even though we all knew it wasn't. Mike was there, too. Mike's the kind of guy who needs proof for everything. He's a scientist, or at least he thinks like one. He doesn't believe in anything he can't measure or explain. We were all sitting around the patio table, swapping ghost stories about the house, and Mike just shook his head. "I don't believe it," he said. "Not until you give me evidence." I get it. I'm a science guy too. I like proof. But I've been in that house enough times to know that something's off. I've seen the shadow of a man walking down the hallway when no one's there. I've heard footsteps in the attic when the ladders folded up. I've felt the air go cold in the middle of summer. I told Mike all of that, and he just shrugged. "There's got to be a better explanation," he said. I didn't argue. What was the point? Either you believed it or you didn't. But then something happened. Something small, but enough to make even Mike pause. I was sitting at the table, facing the sliding glass door. The blinds were open, and I could see the lamp in the den, casting its light across the room. And then out of nowhere I saw it. A shadow. A man's shadow, clear as day, cast on the blinds. It started at the floor, like someone was standing there, but there was no one in the room. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, solid and real. I pointed it out to Mike. "Look," I said. "Right there. You see that?" He turned and looked. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just stared at the shadow, like he was trying to figure it out. Finally, he said, "I can't explain that." "Okay," I said. And that was it. We didn't talk about it again. We just kept drinking, kept laughing, kept pretending like everything was normal. The night went on, and eventually people started to drift off. Some went home. Others crashed on the couch or the floor. I stayed up late, talking and drinking, until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I must have passed out in the chair beside the lamp in the den, because that's where I woke up the next morning. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes in the early hours, when the sun is just starting to rise and the world feels still. I could hear my friend in the kitchen, talking softly to his son. The kid was fussing, and my friend was trying to calm him down. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the lamp, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. The old man. He was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, just like he always did. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd see. A shadow, a figure, something that wasn't really there, but was there all the same. I could hear his footsteps, soft and steady, like he was walking on carpet. But the kitchen floor was tile. I sat there for a long time, watching the lamp, listening to the footsteps. My friend didn't seem to notice. He was too busy with his son, but I knew he'd seen it before. We all had. It was part of the house, part of the family, part of the story. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The old man was gone, just like that. I got up and went to the kitchen, where my friend was still trying to calm his son. The kid was pointing at the corner, where the old man had been. "Old man," he said, his voice soft and sure. My friend didn't say anything. He just nodded, like he understood. And maybe he did. Maybe we all did. The house was haunted. We knew it. We'd seen it. We'd felt it. But it wasn't scary, not really. It was just part of life. Part of the house. Part of us. I stayed for breakfast, and we didn't talk about the old man. We didn't need to. He was there, and then he wasn't. That's how it always was. That's how it always would be. Later, as I was leaving, I stopped at the sliding glass door and looked back into the den. The lamp was still on, casting its warm glow across the room. For a moment, I thought I saw the shadow again, standing there, watching. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't say anything. I just walked out the door and got in my car. As I drove away, I couldn't help but think about Mike. He'd wanted evidence, and he'd gotten it. But it didn't change anything. The house was still haunted. The old man was still there. And no amount of science could explain that away. Maybe that's the thing about ghosts. They don't need to be explained. They just are. And sometimes that's enough. It was supposed to be a normal night. My dad and older brother were out camping, and my younger brother was staying at a friend's house. That left just me, my mom, and Abby, our cat, alone in the house. We had decided to watch a movie, something to pass the time, so we picked Mystic River. It was one of those movies that pulled you in, especially at the more intense moments. Everything was quiet except for the sound from the TV. The lights were dim, and the house felt unusually still. Then, out of nowhere, the banging started. It was loud, sharp, irregular thuds coming from downstairs. It wasn't rhythmic. It wasn't something that could be mistaken for pipes or the house settling. It was forceful, deliberate. The kind of noise that makes your stomach drop before your brain even registers fear. We froze. The movie kept playing, but we weren't watching anymore. I reached for the controller to pause it, and just as the sound cut off, the banging continued for about 10 more seconds. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence filled the house again, but now it felt different, thicker, heavier, charged with something I couldn't quite place. We sat there frozen, trying to process what we had just heard. We had to check. We couldn't just sit there, letting fear dictate our actions. My mom grabbed the nearest thing she could use as a weapon, a cheap plastic horn that had been left lying around. I wanted to laugh at how ridiculous it was, but I didn't. There was nothing funny about this. I followed her as we carefully made our way downstairs, every creak of the wooden floor making me flinch. The living room was empty, the kitchen silent. Nothing seemed out of place. We checked the front door, locked. The gate locked. The garage shut tight. Everything seemed fine, and for a moment, I thought maybe we had imagined it. Maybe it had been something explainable, something stupid. Then we got to the sliding back door. The gate was open. My breath caught in my throat. I knew, with absolute certainty, that it had been locked earlier. I had tried to get in through that very door after coming back from frisbee practice. It had been locked. I had no doubt about that. And yet, now it stood open. My mom tried to brush it off, mumbling something about how it must have already been open. But I wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong, and the cold realization settled into my bones. We shut the gate, locked it, double-checked everything again, but the unease didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. We weren't going to take any chances. Our flimsy plastic horn was abandoned in favor of something more substantial: hammers. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Armed and on edge, we moved through the house, checking every room, every closet, every shadowed corner. The last place left to check was the maid's room at the back of the house. We stepped inside, scanning every inch of the small, dimly lit space. It was empty. Just as I started to let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, I heard it. 2 claps. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate clap, then another. My stomach twisted, and I felt my skin go ice cold. I didn't say a word. I just turned and locked the door, barricading us inside. My mom and I stood there, barely breathing, gripping our hammers like they were our last line of defense. Minutes passed in silence, stretching endlessly, but nothing happened. No more noises, no more movement. Just us and the overwhelming sense that we were not alone. After what felt like forever, we gathered the courage to step back out. Everything looked the same, untouched, unchanged. But we weren't done yet. We had to check outside. The backyard loomed before us, dark and wide. We stepped out cautiously, our senses on high alert. Abby, our cat, came with us, her ears pricked, body tense. She was always good at noticing things before we did, and right now, she was staring at the empty lot behind our house. Then we heard it, a scuffling sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that we hadn't imagined any of it. Someone had been there. Maybe they still were. I turned my head to look at Abby. She was rigid, eyes fixed on the same spot. That was enough for me. We weren't imagining things. We didn't wait around. We moved back inside, locked every door, and stayed alert for the rest of the night. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was shallow and restless. The next morning, in the daylight, things felt different, but not entirely better. We checked the backyard again. There were footprints in the dirt near the back gate, leading away toward the empty lot. The grass was disturbed, broken twigs scattered where someone had stood. We never found out who it was, what they wanted, or why they left. But we knew one thing for sure: we hadn't been alone that night. I was home alone that night. I was a kid, maybe 12 or 13, and I remember how quiet the house felt. It wasn't like the normal quiet, the kind you get used to when you live somewhere long enough. It was something else, something deeper. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you know you're alone. I was in the basement, sitting on the old couch that sagged in the middle, watching TV. It was late, but not too late, probably around 8 or 9. My parents and siblings weren't supposed to be home for a couple of hours. They had gone out for the evening, and I had the house to myself. I remember the hum of the television filling the basement, the light from the screen flickering against the walls. I was comfortable, wrapped up in an old blanket, feet propped up on the coffee table. The air in the basement was always a little cooler than the rest of the house, but that night it felt colder than usual. Still, I didn't think much of it. Then I heard the front door open. It wasn't a quiet sound. It was deliberate, the creak of the hinges, the heavy clunk as it shut. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents weren't due back for hours. My siblings were with them. No one should have been there but me. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the house just settled. That's what my parents always told me when I got scared. Houses settle. Wood expands and contracts. But then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Slow. Steady. They walked into the kitchen and stopped. I sat there frozen, my breath shallow. My mind raced through possibilities. Could it be my dad? Had they come home early? Maybe he had forgotten something? But no, I would have heard the car. The basement door was open, and from where I was sitting, I could see up the stairs, but I couldn't see into the kitchen. I told myself to stay put, to just keep watching TV like I hadn't heard anything. Maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. But I couldn't. I stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was in the house could hear it. I took a step forward, then another, moving toward the stairs. The TV still played behind me, the only sound in the room. When I reached the base of the stairs, I paused, listening. Silence. Whoever had walked into the kitchen wasn't moving anymore. I swallowed hard and crept up the stairs. Each step felt like it took forever. The air felt thick, heavy. I reached the top of the stairs and peered into the kitchen. And there he was. A figure stood in the middle of the room. He wasn't moving. He wasn't looking at me. He was just standing there, still. The only light in the kitchen came from the street lamp outside, filtering in through the window above the sink. It cast long shadows, stretching across the tiled floor. Muddy footprints led from the door to where he stood. I don't remember what he was wearing. I don't remember his face. I just remember the feeling in my chest, the absolute, paralyzing terror. I ran. I don't even remember making the decision to move. 1 second I was staring at him, and the next I was sprinting for the front door. My bare feet hit the hardwood floor as I threw the door open and bolted outside. The cold night air hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I ran straight to my neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they answered. I must have been frantic because they didn't ask questions. They just let me inside and called the police. The officers arrived a few minutes later. They searched the house, checked every room, every closet, every corner. They found nothing. Nothing, except for the muddy footprints. They led from the front door to the center of the kitchen, and then they just stopped. No prints leading away. No sign of forced entry. No sign of anyone leaving. It made no sense. I told them what I saw, but they couldn't explain it. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe the footprints were from earlier in the day, and I had just scared myself. That's what they told me. But I knew better. I went back to the house with my parents once they got home. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. Nothing else happened that night, but I never felt alone in that house again. It was always just a feeling at first, a weight in the air, a sense that someone was watching. But then little things started happening. My cat would stare at empty corners, her fur standing on end. I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was standing beside my bed. Sometimes, I would hear footsteps when no one else was home. One night, my cat walked into my room, stopped dead in her tracks, and stared at the space behind me. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared. I couldn't turn around. I wanted to, but I couldn't. The air felt thick, heavy, just like it had that night in the kitchen. Then, without warning, my cat bolted out of the room. I ran right behind her. We moved out of that house a few years later. And when we did, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Like I could breathe again. I don't talk about it much. Most people wouldn't believe me. Hell, sometimes I don't even believe myself. But I know what I saw that night, and no one will ever change my mind. A couple of years ago, my wife, then my girlfriend, and I were driving late at night to my friend's place. He lived out by the water, and the road leading to his house followed the shoreline. To our left, the dark expanse of the water stretched out, black and endless. The only thing breaking it up was the occasional reflection of the moon or the shimmering lights of distant houses across the bay. To our right, a golf course, abandoned at this hour, stretched out in neat rolling hills, hidden in darkness apart from the occasional glow from a nearby street lamp. It was a drive I had taken before, familiar enough that I wasn't paying much attention to anything except the road in front of me. The night was quiet. The road, smooth and dark, curved ahead in a slow, gradual turn, the trees lining the edge of the golf course shifting and twisting as we passed. I was going just over the speed limit, not fast, but moving steady. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn night where the chill had just enough bite to make you appreciate the warmth inside the car. My girlfriend was relaxed in the passenger seat, gazing out the window, watching the water pass by. Then I saw it. It was just ahead, stepping onto the road from the right side, emerging from the shadows of the golf course. My eyes caught the movement before my brain registered what I was looking at. A figure tall, impossibly tall. It must have been over 9 feet, maybe even taller. The sheer size of it threw off my sense of perspective for a second. It wasn't human. At least, it didn't look human in any way I could understand. The strangest part was that I could see through it. Not entirely, but enough. It wasn't a solid figure. The headlights caught it, but instead of illuminating it, they seemed to pass through, only partially disrupted. The best way I can describe it is like looking at a shadow that wasn't attached to anything, a moving absence of light. It had a distinct shape, though. A head, broad shoulders, long limbs. It crossed the road in a smooth, purposeful motion, its body shifting as if it were gliding rather than walking. As it passed in front of a reflective road sign, I saw the glow of the sign dim slightly, like something was physically blocking it out. Then it was gone, disappearing into the golf course, swallowed by the darkness of the trees beyond. My hands were gripping the wheel tight. My heart was hammering in my chest. My breathing was shallow, but I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road, to keep driving. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my headlights had hit something at just the right angle to cast a bizarre shadow. Maybe. But then I glanced over at my girlfriend. She was staring at me, eyes wide, face pale. I didn't have to ask. She had seen it too. We didn't speak. Not for a few minutes. The silence in the car stretched, heavy and thick, filled with unspoken questions, unformed thoughts. I wanted to explain it away, to rationalize it, but there was no rational explanation that made sense. The thing was too big. Shadows don't just move across roads like that. And shadows don't block out light. The rest of the drive felt different, heavier. The air in the car was thick, almost oppressive. My fingers ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles white. I kept stealing glances in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind us, but there was nothing. Just the empty road stretching back into the dark. When we finally reached my friend's house, we didn't talk about it. Not right away. It felt wrong to bring it up, like saying it out loud would make it more real. But later that night, when we were sitting outside by the water, the waves lapping gently against the shore, my girlfriend finally broke the silence. "You saw it too, didn't you?" I nodded. That was all we said about it that night. But it never really left my mind. After that night, every time I drove that road, I paid extra attention to that spot. I studied the way the light hit the signs, the way the trees cast their shadows, the way my headlights moved as I rounded the bend. I tried everything to recreate what I had seen, to find some explanation. But I never could. The memory of that figure, that impossible, towering shape, has stayed with me. I still don't know what it was. Maybe I never will. But I know what I saw. And I know I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was about 10 or 11 years old that summer. My brother was a year younger than me, and we had spent all day playing on the beach, running through the waves, and digging holes in the sand. We were staying at a beach house for vacation, a rental our parents had booked for a week. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small house with wooden floors and big windows that let the salty breeze roll through the rooms. It had a screened porch on the front, and that night, my brother and I decided we would sleep out there. It had seemed like a great idea at the time. The air was warm but not too hot, and the sound of the ocean in the distance made it feel peaceful. Our parents had let us drag out some blankets and pillows, and we set up our little sleeping area on the porch, excited for what felt like an adventure. The screens kept the bugs out, and the porch had a good view of the quiet road that ran in front of the house. Across the street, there was another house with a small front yard, and beyond that, a cluster of oak trees with thick, twisting branches. I remember falling asleep easily, the waves in the background mixing with the hum of insects in the distance. But at some point during the night, something woke me up. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe it was a sound, or maybe it was just the way the air felt different. I blinked a few times, adjusting to the dim light from the street lamp a little ways down the road. That's when I saw him. A man was walking down the street. He looked scruffy, his clothes loose and a little too big for him. His hair was messy, and even from a distance, I could tell that he kept glancing over his shoulder. It wasn't the kind of casual look people do when they hear a noise. It was quick, nervous, like he thought someone was following him. I lay still, barely breathing as I watched him. When he got in front of our house, he hesitated for a second, then crossed the street into the yard of the house across from us. He moved toward the oak trees, disappearing into the shadows beneath their low-hanging branches. My breath felt shallow as I watched him. He wasn't just standing there, he was searching for something. His hands moved over the ground, pushing aside leaves and dirt. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked off, disappearing down the street. I stared at the spot where he had been for a long time, my heartbeat slowing as the stillness of the night settled back in. Eventually, I must have drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, I wasn't sure what time it was. The sky was still dark, but something felt off. It was quiet, too quiet. I turned my head, and that's when I saw them. Two men. The same scruffy man from earlier was back, and this time, he wasn't alone. Another man, slightly taller and wearing a dark jacket, was crouched beside him. They were under the oak trees, their hands gripping small shovels, digging at the ground. Every few seconds, they would stop and glance toward the road, ducking behind the tree trunks whenever a car passed. I wanted to wake my brother, but I was frozen. My mind felt slow, heavy with sleep. My body wouldn't move. Instead, I just watched, my eyes barely open, my breathing shallow. And then something strange started to happen. I was so tired that my dreams started mixing with what I was seeing. The men digging became something else, figures with giant, clawed hands reaching up from the earth, grasping at them as they moved. The trees above them seemed to twist and bend, their branches stretching down like fingers. Every time they ducked down to hide, the shadows around them moved like they were alive. I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. Eventually, I must have fallen all the way back to sleep, because the next thing I knew, the sun was coming up. The sky was pale blue, the air warm with the promise of another hot day. I sat up, my back sore from sleeping on the hard porch floor, my mind still tangled with the images from the night before. I hesitated for a long time before telling my parents about it. When I finally did, they laughed it off. "You were dreaming," my mom said, brushing my hair out of my face. My dad just shook his head, amused. But then my brother got up. He rubbed his eyes, yawned, and then, completely unprompted, said, "Did you see those guys digging last night?" A silence settled over the room. My parents' smiles faded. My dad straightened up a little. "What?" he asked. My brother shrugged. "There were two guys digging under the trees across the street. I watched them for a long time. I thought I was dreaming." My dad didn't laugh this time. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the house across the street. After a moment, he muttered something under his breath and went outside. My mom followed, and I grabbed my shoes and ran after them. The lady who lived in the house was already outside, tending to her flower beds. My dad called out to her, asking if she had seen anything strange. She frowned, shaking her head, but then her expression changed. "That's odd," she said. "Early this morning, when I came out to check my plants, there were dogs under the trees. They were digging. I shooed them off, but I saw that they had dug something up." She paused, then added, "I didn't think much of it at the time. Just figured it was some old food or something." We all stood there for a long moment, looking at the disturbed earth under the trees. There were marks where the dogs had dug, the dirt uneven and scattered. My dad didn't say anything else. He just turned around and walked back to our house, his expression unreadable. I don't know if the police were ever called. I don't know if anyone ever found out what had been buried there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just some garbage or an old pet someone had buried years ago. But I never slept on that porch again. And every time I think back to that night, I wonder what those men were looking for, or what they had buried. It was my first day on the job, and I was nervous. Door-to-door sales weren't exactly my thing, but I needed the money, and the World Wildlife Fund seemed like a decent cause to work for. The town I was in was the kind of place you'd see on a postcard, quaint, quiet, and picture-perfect. The village green was lush and well-kept, surrounded by cottages with flower boxes in the windows. There was even a cricket field right in the center, like something out of an old English movie. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. I was wrong. I just made my first sale. It was a small contract, but it felt like a win. The lady who signed it was friendly, middle-aged, with a warm smile and a house that smelled like lavender. She had these beautiful photographs on her walls, landscapes mostly, of places I'd never been. We were chatting about them when it happened. A scream. Not just any scream, but the kind that makes your blood run cold. It was panicked, desperate, and it cut through the quiet of the town like a knife. I turned around, and there she was, a woman in a smart office dress, running toward us. She was stumbling, her heels catching on the uneven pavement, her face pale and twisted with fear. She saw us and screamed again, this time words. "Water! Get water!" My first thought was that her car had caught fire. It made sense, didn't it? Why else would she need water so urgently? I didn't stop to think. I just started knocking on doors, asking for water, not really knowing what I was doing or why. No one answered. The houses were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I gave up on the doors and walked toward where the woman had come from. My green WWF bib flapped in the breeze, and I remember thinking how out of place it looked in this perfect little town. That's when a man called out to me, "Over here, quick." He thought I was a paramedic. I didn't correct him. I just ran. What I saw next is something I'll never forget. A man was lying on the ground, and he was burned. Not just a little burned, but completely. His skin was blackened and blistered, his clothes melted into his flesh. The smell hit me first, acrid and sharp, like burning plastic, and something worse, something human. His eyes were open, but they were milky white, unseeing. He was alive, though. Barely. His lips moved, and I leaned closer, my stomach churning. "Tell Lucy I love her," he whispered, over and over. "Tell Lucy I love her." I didn't know what to do. I wasn't a paramedic. I wasn't even trained in first aid. I just stood there, frozen, while the man kept whispering those words. The woman in the office dress was crying now, her hands pressed to her mouth. The man who'd called me over was on the phone, shouting at the emergency services to hurry up. But they didn't. It felt like forever before anyone arrived. When they finally did, it was too late. The man was gone. I stood there, watching as they covered him with a sheet, and I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. Those milky white eyes. And his words. "Tell Lucy I love her." Who was Lucy? His wife? His daughter? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. The police came eventually, and they asked me questions. I told them everything I could, which wasn't much. I didn't know the man. I didn't know why he'd done it. But later I found out. He'd had an argument with someone, his wife, maybe, or a friend. No one knew for sure. But he'd threatened to kill himself before. This time, he'd meant it. He'd climbed into the boot of his Land Rover, doused himself in petrol, and set himself on fire. If I'd walked into that cul-de-sac 10 minutes earlier, I would have seen it happen. 10 minutes later, and I wouldn't have seen him at all. I didn't go back to work that day. I couldn't. I went home and sat in the dark, trying to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't. Those eyes, those words, they stayed with me. I kept thinking about Lucy. Did she know? Did she know how much he loved her? Did she know what he'd done? I hoped not. I hoped she never had to see what I'd seen. The next day, I quit the job. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I put on that green bib, I thought of him. Every time I knocked on a door, I expected to hear another scream. I couldn't shake the feeling that something like this could happen again, that I'd be there to see it, helpless. So I left. I left the job, the town, and the memory of that day behind. Or at least I tried to. But some things you can't forget. Some things stay with you, no matter how hard you try to push them away. That man's face, his voice, his words, they're still there, in the back of my mind. And every now and then, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear them again. "Tell Lucy I love her." And I wonder if she ever found out. I wonder if she knows. When I was little, my dad would sometimes go to his church down the road for maybe half an hour and leave me home alone. It didn't happen all the time, but when it did, I never liked it. Our house sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by hundreds of acres of woods and fields. And when you're young, everything seems bigger, emptier, and lonelier. But I had my cat. She was a quiet thing, never made much noise except for the occasional chirp or purr. She liked to sit with me on the couch, curled up against my leg while I read or watched TV. But whenever I was alone, she would stare long, focused stares at corners of the room, at the hallway, at the empty air above us. She would watch, completely still, her tail flicking only slightly, as if tracking something I couldn't see. One day, my dad was supposed to be gone for 30 minutes. I was used to that. I could handle that. But then 30 minutes turned into 45. I kept checking the clock, waiting to hear the rumble of his truck coming up the long dirt driveway. But nothing came. It was quiet outside. It was always quiet out here. No neighbors, no cars passing by, just the sound of wind in the trees, sometimes the chirp of birds, or the rustling of something in the grass. But that day, the quiet felt different. It felt like something was waiting. I got up from my spot on the couch. The air inside the house felt too still, too heavy. The way the sunlight filtered through the windows made the dust float in the air, moving just enough to remind me that time hadn't stopped. I walked toward the living room, passing the entrance where the piano sat, an old upright my dad had gotten from some church sale. The air around me felt colder as I stepped past it. And then, a hand grabbed my left shoulder. Hard, a firm grip that shoved me forward. I stumbled, my feet catching on the rug, and as I tripped, a sound exploded in my ears. A bell. A huge, deafening ding-ding-ding-ding-ding, like something from a shipyard or a train station, but so loud it vibrated through my skull. My cat let out a sharp, violent hiss and sprang from the couch, her claws scratching against the wooden floor as she bolted down the stairs into the basement. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. My shoulder burned where I'd been grabbed, but when I looked, there was nothing there. The room was exactly the same as it had been a moment ago. The piano was still, its keys untouched. The chandelier above me swayed slightly, but I told myself it was just from my movement, from the rush of air as I stumbled forward. The bell sound was gone. Silence filled the room again, except for the ringing in my ears. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to look around too much. I just wanted my dad to come home. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at nothing, listening to my own breathing, feeling the uneven thud of my heart in my chest. The house felt different now, as if it had been changed in some small, invisible way. When my dad finally pulled into the driveway, I ran outside before he even got the chance to open the door. He looked at me, confused, asked why I was standing out there like that. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain it. So I just shrugged, said, "I don't know," and followed him inside. But my cat wouldn't come upstairs for the rest of the night. She stayed down in the basement, hidden under an old table, her ears flat against her head. After that day, I never felt completely comfortable being alone in the house. Things started happening more often. Doors would slam when no windows were open. The chandelier in the dining room would sway, creaking softly as if someone had brushed against it. Objects disappeared, my phone, my glasses, my dad's watch, only to turn up in places we hadn't put them. My parents noticed it too, though they never said much about it. My sister would get uneasy at night, closing her bedroom door tightly before going to sleep. My friends didn't like staying over. One of them, after visiting once, told me it felt like being watched. Like dozens of eyes were on them, tracking their every move. The air, they said, felt too heavy, too thick, like something was pressing down on them. I didn't know what was happening in that house. I still don't. But even now, whenever I'm alone there, I feel it. That weight in the air. That waiting, watching presence. And I know deep down that something else is there. Something I can't see. Something I don't want to see. I was 16 when this happened. It was a week after I started my senior year of high school, and life felt like it was shifting in ways I couldn't quite understand. My grandmother had just died. She was 81, and her death wasn't sudden. She'd been sick for a while, but it still hit hard. She and my grandfather had lived with us for the last 10 years, so she wasn't just my grandma, she was a constant presence in my life. Her absence left a quiet, heavy emptiness in the house, like the air itself was holding its breath. The day it happened, I came home from school feeling completely drained. I'd been riding my bike to school and work, and on top of that, I was in the middle of a growth spurt. My body felt like it was working overtime, and by the time I got home, all I wanted to do was collapse. I didn't even make it to my room. I dropped my backpack by the door, kicked off my shoes, and flopped onto the couch in the living room. The room she died in was right next to the living room, just on the other side of the wall where my feet were pointing. I didn't think much about it at the time. I was too tired to think about anything. I fell asleep almost instantly. The kind of sleep that feels heavy and deep, like you're sinking into the couch. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, it wasn't because of a noise or a dream. It was like something in the room had shifted, and my body just knew to wake up. I opened my eyes, and there she was, my grandmother. She was standing in the doorway, just like she used to when she'd come to check on me. She looked the same as I remembered, her thin frame, her silver hair pulled back into a bun, the floral house dress she always wore. But something about her felt off. Not scary exactly, but wrong, like she didn't belong there. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to say something, to call out to her, but my voice caught in my throat. She took a step into the room, her eyes locking onto mine, and that's when I felt it, a wave of cold that washed over me, like someone had opened a freezer door and let the icy air spill out. It wasn't just cold, though. It was heavy, like it was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I don't know how long we stared at each other. It felt like forever, but it could have been just a few seconds. Finally, I managed to speak. My voice came out shaky, barely above a whisper. "Grandma," I said, "you remember you died, right?" She didn't answer right away. For a moment, she just stood there, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Ten cuidado. Nos vemos después." Be careful. We'll see each other later. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back down the hallway, her footsteps silent against the hardwood floor. I watched her go, my mind racing, until she disappeared around the corner. I didn't get up to follow her. I couldn't. My body felt like it was glued to the couch, weighed down by that cold, heavy feeling. Eventually, I closed my eyes, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't keep them open anymore. The exhaustion pulled me back under, and I fell asleep again. When I woke up later, the house was quiet. The sun had moved lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the living room. For a moment, I just lay there, trying to piece together what had happened. Had I dreamed it? It felt so real, but it couldn't have been. My grandmother was gone. I'd seen her in the casket at the funeral. I'd watched them lower her into the ground. It had to have been a dream. But if it was, why did it feel so vivid? Why could I still feel that cold, heavy air pressing down on me? I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my parents, not my friends. What would I even say? "Hey, I think I saw my dead grandma in the living room today." They'd think I was losing it. So I kept it to myself, but it stayed with me, nagging at the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite pull out. A week later, I was driving home from work. It was late, and the roads were empty. I was tired, more tired than usual, and my mind kept drifting back to that moment on the couch. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like I was missing something important. I was so lost in thought that I didn't see the car until it was too late. It came out of nowhere, speeding through a red light. I slammed on the brakes, but it wasn't enough. The impact was sudden and violent, the sound of crunching metal filling the air. My head hit the steering wheel, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was still in the car, but it was quiet. Too quiet. My ears were ringing, and my head was throbbing. I could feel blood trickling down my face, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was made of lead. It took everything I had to lift my head and look around. The other car was gone. There was no sign of it, no skid marks on the road, nothing. It was like it had never been there. But my car was wrecked, the front end crumpled like a soda can. I didn't understand how the other car could have just disappeared, but I didn't have the energy to think about it. All I could think about was getting out of the car. It took me a few tries, but I finally managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and push the door open. My legs felt shaky, like they might give out at any moment, but I forced myself to stand. I leaned against the car for support, taking deep breaths to steady myself. That's when I remembered my grandmother's words. "Ten cuidado. Nos vemos después." Be careful. We'll see each other later. At the time, I hadn't known what she meant. But now, standing there in the middle of the empty road, with my car totaled and my head bleeding, it hit me. She wasn't warning me about something supernatural. She was warning me about this. About the accident. About the fact that I wasn't paying attention, that I was too tired, too distracted, to see what was coming. I don't know how I made it home that night. I don't even remember calling for help or getting a ride. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, my parents sitting by my bed, their faces pale with worry. The doctor said I was lucky. A few inches to the left, and I might not have walked away. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt shaken, like the ground had been pulled out from under me. It took me a long time to process what had happened, to understand that what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, wasn't a ghost or a hallucination. It was my mind's way of warning me, of telling me to be careful. My grandmother had always been the one to look out for me, to make sure I was safe. Even in death, that part of her hadn't changed. I never saw her again after that. But I didn't need to. Her words stayed with me, a reminder to pay attention, to take care of myself. And every time I got behind the wheel after that, I made sure to focus, to keep my eyes on the road. Because I knew deep down that she was still watching over me. Not as a ghost, but as a memory, a part of me that would always be there, looking out for me, even when I didn't realize it. The accident changed me. It made me more cautious, more aware of how fragile life can be. But it also made me grateful, for my family, for the time I'd had with my grandmother, and for the fact that I'd walked away from something that could have been so much worse. And every now and then, when I'm feeling lost or overwhelmed, I think back to that moment on the couch, to the cold, heavy air and her soft, steady voice. And I remember her words. Ten cuidado. Nos vemos después. Be careful. We'll see each other later. It was one of those long, humid summer days when the heat made everything feel slow. The kind of day where the sun felt heavier in the sky, pressing down on your skin, making you crave the cold embrace of the lake. Me and a few of my university friends had driven out of Toronto early that morning, heading to Fort Erie, a spot we'd come to love over the years. The beach there had this old, broken-down pier, half-rotted wood and cracked concrete, stretching out over the water. It wasn't much, but it was perfect for jumping, perfect for feeling that rush right before hitting the water, like for a moment you were weightless before the cold swallowed you whole. We'd spent the better part of the day out there, swimming, drinking cheap beer, soaking in the sun. The pier was busy, packed with locals and other people escaping the city for the weekend. By late afternoon, the golden light had started stretching long shadows across the sand, and the air carried that salty, fishy smell mixed with the scent of sunscreen and weed. Me and 3 of my friends had just finished rolling a joint, and we figured we'd smoke it and take a couple more jumps before heading back home. As we walked toward the pier, I noticed something weird right away. There was a guy, way out at the end of the pier, standing on top of the flagpole. The pole itself was maybe 10 meters high, rusted at the base, and had one of those flimsy flag holders at the top that moved even with the slightest breeze. He wasn't just standing there, he was balancing, his arms stretched out like he was walking a tightrope. From that distance, I could see his friends standing below him, some laughing, others clearly uneasy. A group of girls stood off to the side, hands covering their mouths, eyes wide with worry. At first, I thought he was just messing around, showing off. But as we got closer, it became clear he was struggling to stay up there. His legs wobbled slightly with every gust of wind, and his grip on the flag holder was weak, slipping a little every few seconds. His friends were egging him on, shouting for him to jump. The girls kept telling him to get down, but no one was actually doing anything to stop him. I was only half paying attention. There was this girl standing near the edge of the pier, dark hair, light brown skin, wearing a red bikini. She looked familiar, maybe someone I had seen around campus. I turned to talk to her, trying to think of something clever to say, when a sound cracked through the air. It wasn't a splash. It was a thud, a sickening, deep sound of something heavy hitting concrete. Then came the screams. I snapped my head around just in time to see his body roll from the edge of the pier and disappear into the water. People were moving all at once, some screaming, some covering their faces, others frozen in shock. 2 of his friends immediately jumped in after him, but it was obvious they had no idea what they were doing. They were flailing, kicking wildly, barely able to stay above water themselves. I felt my chest tighten. I was high, and it felt like everything had slowed down, like I was watching a scene from a movie in slow motion. But somewhere in my head, my training kicked in. I was a lifeguard. I had done the drills 100 times before, but this was different. This wasn't a pool. It wasn't controlled. This was a deep, open body of water with a broken pier and 2 idiots making things worse. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the edge, took one deep breath, and dove in. The moment I hit the water, everything was muffled. I opened my eyes, the sting of the lake burning against them as I searched for him. I saw the 2 guys first, their movements erratic, stirring up the sand and murk from the bottom. Then I saw him. He was sinking limp, a dark silhouette against the fading light above. I kicked hard, reaching him in seconds. As soon as I got close, I grabbed under his arms and tilted his head back to keep his mouth above water. I could feel his breath, shallow, barely there. My fingers brushed against his back, feeling something strange, something wrong. It felt loose, unnatural, like a bag of jelly with broken rocks inside. My stomach turned. His spine was shattered. The 2 friends were pulling at him, trying to lift him up by his arms, their eyes wide with panic. Stop! I wanted to yell, but my mouth filled with lake water instead. I had to get him stable. I kicked hard, pushing toward the surface, my lungs burning. Breaking through the water, I gasped for air and looked up at the pier. People were leaning over the edge, shouting, scrambling for something, anything to help. There was no easy way to get him out. The pier was too high above the water, and the shore was too far. My mind raced. Get aboard, something flat. I shouted, but I wasn't sure if anyone heard me over the noise. I knew moving him the wrong way could make things worse, but leaving him in the water wasn't an option either. A couple of guys had climbed down onto a lower part of the pier, reaching for him, but they kept moving too fast, too rough. I held his head still, trying to keep him breathing, trying to keep his body from jerking around too much. He was barely there, his eyelids flickering. Minutes stretched, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, someone managed to get a makeshift stretcher down. A broken wooden board, splintered at the edges but sturdy enough. With careful movements, we lifted him onto it, keeping his head straight, his body as still as possible. The paramedics were still making their way from the shore. It took them 10 whole minutes just to get to us, navigating the broken walkway of the pier. When they finally arrived, they worked fast, their faces unreadable, their hands precise. They resuscitated him once. His chest rose. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd make it. But minutes later, he was gone. I don't remember much of what happened next. I remember sitting on the sand, my hands shaking, watching them load his body onto a stretcher, the blue lights of the ambulance reflecting off the water. People had started to leave. The energy of the beach had changed completely, replaced by a heavy silence. The drive back to Toronto was quiet. No one really spoke. The music played low, but it felt like background noise, something to fill the space between the weight of what we had just seen. I kept running through everything in my head, wondering if I had done enough, if I had been too slow, if I had noticed something too late. The guilt sat heavy in my chest for days, weeks. I had been trained for this, but nothing prepares you for watching someone die in front of you. Summer ended, classes started again, and life moved on, but that day never left me. Even now, years later, every time I see a pier, every time I hear the sound of water splashing against concrete, it all comes back. The moment he hit the ground, the screams, the feeling of his shattered spine beneath my hands, the weight of knowing that sometimes, no matter what you do, it's just not enough. Junior year of high school, I was dating the girl of my dreams. Strawberry blonde hair, pale but not ghostly, wicked smart, and affectionate to the point that it felt like I had somehow won the universe's lottery. She had transferred to a school 3 hours away, which made things tough, but we both put in the effort. I drove out to see her every chance I got, and she did the same for me. We were making it work. That night, I had made the drive. It was late autumn, cold but not unbearable, the kind of weather where you want to be close to someone just for the warmth. We had been driving for a while, talking about anything and everything, when we decided to pull off onto a small dirt road winding through the mountains. The air was crisp, the stars were insane without the glow of city lights, and we just wanted a quiet place to be alone. I parked in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, the smell of sap and damp earth filling the air. There was no wind, no sound except for the occasional rustling in the underbrush. We climbed onto the hood of my Corolla, sitting close, her head resting against my shoulder. The warmth of her body against mine, the slow rhythm of her breathing, it was perfect. We sat there for nearly an hour, talking about our futures, our pasts, the dumb things we had done as kids. She laughed at one of my stories, this soft, genuine sound that made my chest tighten in the best way possible. I remember thinking, in that moment, that I could do this forever. Then we heard it, a low, guttural noise. Not close, but not far either. It was deep, vibrating, almost like a growl, but not quite. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound right. Every hair on my body stood up. I felt her stiffen against me, her breath hitching in her throat. We both stopped talking. We didn't move. We just listened. Silence. Then the sound again. This time closer. We didn't speak. We just slid off the hood of the car, moving as quickly as we could without making too much noise. It was clumsy, like trying to run in a dream, our limbs moving too slow, too uncoordinated. My hands fumbled for the door handle. I yanked it open, she scrambled inside, and I followed, slamming the door shut and locking it without thinking. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. Inside the car, we were huddled together, breathing hard, eyes darting through the windshield and side windows. The night outside was absolute darkness, the kind that eats everything, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only two people left in the world. I reached for the switch and flicked on the running lights. The dim glow barely pushed back the darkness, but it was enough. 2 dots. Reflective. unmoving. About 7 feet away, something was watching us. I couldn't see the shape, just the eyes. Yellow, fixed, unblinking. A primal, instinctual fear crawled up my spine. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't some lost dog. This was something that hunted. My hand found the high beams. I flipped them on. The light hit a cougar crouched low by an outcropping of granite, its body tensed, muscles coiled tight. It had been waiting, watching, deciding. For a moment, none of us moved. The cat, us, the entire forest. Everything was frozen in that terrible, perfect silence. Then it rose, its body stretching upward in slow, deliberate movements. It flicked its ears, not startled, not afraid, just considering. It turned its head slightly, glanced behind it, then looked back at us. And then, as if we were nothing more than an afterthought, it padded away into the night, vanishing like a ghost. The silence that followed was deafening. I could still feel the weight of its gaze, even though it was gone. My hands were shaking. My breath was uneven. I turned to her. She turned to me. We didn't need to say anything. We were both thinking the same thing. We had been prey. Neither of us wanted to stay out there any longer than necessary. I started the car, the engine roaring to life, breaking the oppressive silence. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and the empty space where the cougar had been. I threw it into reverse, turning the car around with a little too much force, tires skidding slightly on the loose dirt. We didn't speak until we were back on the main road, streetlights breaking the illusion of being the only two people left on Earth. Even then, it took a while. The weight of what had just happened sat heavy between us. Finally, she let out a breathy laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing to do. That was... I nodded. Yeah. She exhaled again, shaking her head. Holy shit. We went back to her place after that. There was something about coming so close to something primal, something dangerous, that made us desperate to feel alive. The heat, the adrenaline, the need to cling to something, anything tangible. The night ended in tangled limbs, whispered breaths, skin against skin, the kind of closeness that only comes from surviving something together. When I finally left the next morning, the world felt different. Sharper. Like I had been given a reminder of something I had almost forgotten. We are small. We are fragile. And sometimes we are being watched. I wake up in the middle of the night, the air mattress shifting slightly beneath me. The room is dark, barely any light filtering in through the window. My brothers are pressed against me. The three of us packed together on this single mattress like a pile of tangled limbs. It's not unusual. We've always been close, especially on trips like this where space is tight and comfort is scarce. I don't know what woke me up at first. Maybe it was a sound, or just the feeling of being too warm. I'm always cold, but right now, I feel heat pressing against me from both sides. My younger brother is turned away, his back facing me. My older brother, 19, is in front of me. I don't remember turning this way, but somehow I'm nose to nose with him, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. I try to shift, just a little, just enough to roll onto my back. But something is holding me in place. My arm is trapped beneath me, tingling with that painful numbness that comes from being pinned for too long. I wiggle my fingers, trying to get the blood flowing again, but it doesn't help much. That's when I feel it. The pressure against my back isn't just from my younger brother sleeping beside me. There's something more intentional about it. The way my older brother's arm is draped over me, the way his hand has shifted slightly, fingers brushing against my skin where my tank top has ridden up in my sleep. A slow, creeping dread begins to settle in my stomach. I tell myself I'm imagining it, that he's asleep, that this is just one of those awkward sleeping positions we end up in sometimes. But when I try to move again, his grip tightens. I freeze. My breath catches in my throat, and I stay perfectly still, hoping that if I don't react, maybe he'll shift away on his own. But he doesn't. Instead, his fingers press a little harder, moving just slightly, grazing the hem of my tank top, testing. I want to believe he's still asleep, that this is just some unconscious movement. But the way he reacts when I try to pull away tells me otherwise. He adjusts, making it seem like just another natural shift in sleep. But the way his arm moves, the way his fingers trace over my skin, tells a different story. He's aware. The realization sends a wave of panic through me. My heart starts to pound in my chest, so loud I'm afraid he'll hear it. I don't know what to do. I don't want to believe this is happening. This is my brother. This is someone I trust, someone who has always been there for me. But right now, in this moment, he is a stranger. I need to move. I need to get away. But every time I shift, his grip adjusts. Not too much, not enough to be obvious, but enough to keep me locked in place. I can feel his breath against my cheek, steady, slow, pretending to be asleep. My body is stiff, tense, my mind racing through possibilities. If I move too suddenly, if I push him away, he might react. He's stronger than me. I don't want to wake my younger brother. I don't want to make this real. So I try something else. I shift slowly, carefully, curling in on myself. I move toward my younger brother, pressing my back against him, trying to put as much distance between myself and the arm that holds me captive. For a moment, I think it works. The pressure eases slightly, his grip loosening just enough for me to breathe. I stay like that, curled up, staring into the darkness, willing myself to disappear. Minutes pass, maybe an hour. I don't know. I don't sleep. I don't move. I just wait for the morning, for the safety of daylight, for this night to be over. When the sun finally begins to creep through the window, I pretend I just woke up. I stretch, shift away from him completely, and force myself to act normal. My younger brother stirs beside me, yawning and rubbing his eyes. My older brother rolls onto his back, stretching as if nothing happened. I tell myself that maybe nothing did. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I misunderstood. But the way my skin still burns where his fingers had been, the way my stomach is twisted in knots, tells me otherwise. I don't say anything. I don't know how. The rest of the day, I keep my distance. I don't make eye contact. I don't let myself be alone with him. I don't know if he notices, if he knows that I know. But I do. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. I don't know what his intentions were. But I know one thing for sure. I will never let myself be in that position again. When I was in first grade, I lived in a rough neighborhood. My dad, my brother, and I were staying in my great-grandmother's old house. She owned 2 houses, but she didn't live in this one. It was an old, creaky place, barely holding together, and we were struggling to keep up with payments. Across the street, there was a much cheaper house, and after talking about it for a while, we decided to move in. It wasn't much better, but it was what we could afford. We moved most of our things over within a couple of days. The new house smelled musty, like dust and old wood. The floors creaked worse than the ones in the old house, and everything about it felt off. Maybe it was just because it was empty, or maybe because the whole neighborhood had a way of making your skin crawl. I was just a kid, but even then, I knew the air around that place felt heavier. But it was what we had, and that was that. My cousin lived on the same block, just a few houses down. Since my brother and I had already brought over a bunch of our stuff, we had nothing else to do, so we figured we'd check out the house with him. I don't remember if we told our dad where we were going, but we weren't thinking about that at the time. The 3 of us stepped inside, the old wood groaning under our weight. The house was dim, the windows letting in just enough light to make the dust in the air visible. We walked around, checking out every little detail like kids do. I remember running my fingers along the walls, feeling the peeling paint under my hands. The rooms were small, empty, unfamiliar. It didn't feel like home yet. It just felt like a shell of a house, waiting for someone to fill it. We walked toward the back, looking at the tiny kitchen and the bedrooms. The hallway was narrow, and the walls felt too close together. The whole time, I felt like something was just behind me, breathing down my neck. I kept turning around, expecting to see my dad, or maybe one of the neighbors standing in the doorway, but no one was there. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud bang from the front of the house. We all froze. It was the kind of noise that makes your stomach drop, the kind of sound that makes your heart jump up into your throat. It came from where the front door was. The thing is, that door was old and loud. It squeaked and groaned every time it opened, but we hadn't heard it open. We turned to each other, silent, trying to figure out what to do. Slowly, we made our way back toward the front, our steps cautious and hesitant. And then we saw it. Standing in front of the door was something I still don't have the right words to describe. It was tall, taller than any adult I had ever seen. Its skin was dark red, almost like dried blood, stretched tight over a thin, bony frame. Its eyes were empty, hollow, but they were locked onto me. Not my brother, not my cousin, me. My body locked up. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every part of me screamed to move, to run, but I couldn't. My mind couldn't process what I was looking at. And then all at once, everything clicked and I bolted. We ran, all three of us, scrambling down the hallway and into one of the bedrooms. We slammed the door shut and threw our backs against it, pressing all our weight against the old wood. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of our heavy breathing, our hearts pounding so loud in our ears that it drowned out everything else. Then the noises started. Scraping. Slow, deliberate, like nails dragging across the wood just outside the door. Then the banging. Heavy, rhythmic, like something was slamming its fists, if it even had fists, against the walls. The whole room felt like it was shaking. We sat there, pressed against the door, too scared to move, too scared to speak. I remember staring at the cracks in the floor, tracing them with my eyes over and over again, trying to focus on anything except what was happening just a few feet away. The air in the room was suffocating. It was like something was pressing down on us, trying to squeeze the life out of us without ever touching us. I don't know how long we sat there. It felt like hours, but it was probably less. Eventually, the noises stopped. No more scraping, no more banging, just silence. We didn't move at first. We just sat there, waiting, expecting something else to happen. When nothing did, we finally got the courage to stand up. We opened the door, just enough to peek out. The house was empty. The front door was still shut, just like we had left it. But the air still felt wrong. Heavy. Charged, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. We didn't waste any more time. We ran. We ran straight out of that house, across the street, and back to our old home. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran until we were through the door and inside, where it felt safe, where we could finally breathe again. I don't remember telling my dad what happened. I don't remember what we did after that. I just remember the fear, the weight of it pressing down on me even after we had made it home. We never went back inside that house alone again. We moved into it eventually, but it never felt right. It never felt like home. Even after we settled in, I always had the feeling that something was watching, waiting. Years passed, and I tried to push it out of my mind. I tried to tell myself that maybe we imagined it, that maybe our young minds had twisted something normal into something terrifying. But the thing is, all three of us saw the same thing. We all heard the same noises. And no matter how much I try to convince myself that it wasn't real, I can still feel its eyes on me, even now, all these years later. I used to work at a placement facility for juvenile delinquents. It wasn't a jail, but for some of the kids there, it might as well have been. The place was meant for rehabilitation, a last stop before a real prison sentence or a fresh start. Some of the kids were just troubled, sent there for minor offenses or behavioral issues. Others were different, dangerous. You could see it in their eyes, the way they carried themselves, the way they looked at you when they thought you weren't watching. I had just started the job, fresh out of training, and I was given the overnight shift. It sounded easy enough, light cleaning, 15-minute bed checks to make sure all the kids were in their rooms, then a lot of downtime. That first night, I thought I had lucked out. The dormitory-style setup meant I had a good view of most of the rooms from the central staff desk, and the place was quiet at night. It seemed like an easy job. One of the kids in the facility was different, though. He was the kind of kid that made your skin crawl, the kind that made you double-check that your back was against a wall when he was in the room. I won't say his name, but I'll never forget him. He was a problem, always testing the limits, always watching. They had caught him before with sewing needles, tiny, sharp things he had hidden in his clothes and used to scratch people when he walked past. Nobody knew where he got them, but every time they took them away, he found more. Because of this, he was on a special program. No personal clothing, no personal items. Just sweatpants with no pockets, a white t-shirt, and a mattress on the floor. That was it. That first night on my own, I was exhausted. Training had been long and draining, and by the time midnight rolled around, my body was screaming for sleep. I sat behind the staff desk, watching the dimly lit room, and before I knew it, my eyelids got heavy. I told myself I'd just rest my eyes for a second. Just a second. I must have been out for no more than 5 minutes when something jolted me awake. A presence. The kind that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end before your mind even catches up. I opened my eyes and nearly fell out of my chair. He was right in front of me, leaning forward over the desk, his face just inches from mine. His breath smelled like metal, like blood. His eyes were locked onto mine, empty but intense. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. My body wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I sucked in a sharp breath and forced myself to sit up, gripping the edge of the desk to steady myself. He didn't react. He didn't flinch or step back. Just stood there, unblinking, too close, too still. I swallowed hard and looked at him. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. My brain latched onto the first reasonable explanation. Bathroom. He must need to use the bathroom. It was right across from the staff desk, just a few steps away. There was no reason for him to come to me first, no reason for him to be this close. But he just stood there. Something in me snapped to attention. A deep, primal instinct. My exhaustion was gone. My body was electric with adrenaline. I kept my eyes on him, forcing myself to stay calm. I told him, without asking, "Go use the bathroom." Still, he didn't move. I didn't say anything else. I just kept looking at him, waiting, not giving him anything more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. He walked away, not toward the bathroom, but straight back to his room. No hesitation, no urgency. Like he had never intended to go in the first place. I sat there, frozen, my heart still hammering. I listened as he disappeared into the darkness of his room, the soft rustle of his blanket as he lay back down on the mattress. I forced myself to breathe, forced my body to relax, but my hands still trembled as I reached for my clipboard. I checked the clock. Only a few minutes had passed, but I felt like I had aged years. That was the last time I ever let myself get tired on a night shift. Every time my eyelids got heavy after that, I remembered the way he had stood there, the way he had watched me. I remembered the feeling of waking up with him so close, so silent, so still. That was enough to keep me awake, no matter how long the night dragged on. Even now, years later, working a different job, living a different life, I still think about that night. I still feel that cold, creeping dread when I remember how he looked at me, how I woke up to find him there, watching. I've worked a lot of jobs since then, but I've never had trouble staying awake at night again. Not after that. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived in an apartment complex with my family. It wasn't anything fancy, just a collection of dull, beige buildings arranged around a small communal pool. The place always had a slight chlorine smell, even in the areas far from the water, and in the summer, the pavement would get so hot it could burn your feet if you weren't quick enough. It was a normal evening when we went to the pool. I remember the sky was beginning to turn deep shades of orange and purple, the last light of the sun stretching across the tops of the buildings. It wasn't too crowded that night, just a few people lazily floating in the water, some elderly residents sitting on the plastic lounge chairs, talking quietly. My parents were chatting with some neighbors while I splashed around, enjoying the feeling of the warm water against my skin. At some point, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. The pool had a small restroom building nearby, just a simple structure with 2 doors, one for men and one for women. I'd used it plenty of times before, so I didn't think twice about heading over on my own. When I pushed open the heavy metal door, I immediately noticed something was off. The light wasn't on. Normally, there was a buzzing orange glow from the overhead fixture, giving the whole space a kind of dim, sickly illumination. But now nothing, just darkness. The only light came from a faint glow filtering in through the slightly open door behind me, casting long shadows across the tile floor. For a second, I hesitated. The dark made everything look unfamiliar. The stalls, the sinks, even the mirrors seemed distorted in the lack of light. But I really had to go, so I pushed forward, telling myself it was just the same bathroom I'd been in plenty of times before. My eyes were already adjusting, and I could make out the shapes well enough. I stepped into the first stall, closing the door behind me. The latch made a soft clicking sound as it slid into place. Sitting there, I could hear the muffled sounds of the pool outside, distant laughter, the splash of someone diving in. The bathroom itself was silent except for the occasional drip from a faucet. As my eyes fully adjusted to the dark, I started noticing details I hadn't before. The grime on the tiles, the faint scratches on the metal stall door, the small movements of something shifting in the dim light. That was when I saw it. To my right, clinging to the tiled wall just a foot or so away, was something large. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I focused, I realized what I was looking at. A spider. But not just any spider. This thing was huge. It was easily the size of a dinner plate, its legs curled inward slightly, making it appear more compact. Its body was covered in coarse, grayish hair, and its legs were thick, not like the thin, spindly legs of a normal spider. And then there were the eyes, 8 small, dark, glossy beads staring straight at me. I froze. It was so close. If it moved, it could easily reach me. But it didn't move. It just stayed there, pressed against the wall, as if it were just as aware of me as I was of it. My breath felt stuck in my throat, but strangely, I wasn't scared. Not in the way you'd expect. There was no rush of panic, no urge to scream or run. Just a quiet, almost surreal awareness that I was sitting just inches away from something completely unnatural. I kept perfectly still, watching it. The longer I stared, the more details I noticed. The strange shape of its legs, the way they seemed too thick, too stubby for a normal spider. The texture of its body, almost like the rough fur of a dog, rather than the smooth exoskeleton I expected. The way its eyes reflected the faint light, each one gleaming slightly differently, like wet stones. I realized then that I was holding my breath. Slowly, carefully, I exhaled and shifted just slightly. The spider twitched, just the smallest movement, barely noticeable. It didn't seem aggressive, but it was alert, watching. I don't know why I wasn't afraid. Maybe it was because it wasn't acting threatening. Maybe it was because my young brain hadn't fully grasped how strange the situation was. Or maybe deep down, some part of me knew that fear would only make things worse. So I did the only thing that made sense in the moment. I ignored it. I finished up as quickly and quietly as I could, making sure not to make any sudden movements. The whole time, the spider stayed still, unmoving, just watching. When I was done, I carefully reached for the stall door, slowly slid the latch open, and stepped out. The moment I was free, I turned and walked straight out of the bathroom. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I just pushed the door open and stepped back into the warm evening air, the sounds of the pool instantly filling my ears again. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. It wasn't that I was keeping a secret. I just didn't think to mention it. It wasn't until years later that I really started thinking about how strange that encounter was. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was young and misjudged its size. Maybe the darkness made it look bigger than it really was. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that nothing I've seen since has matched what I saw that night. Even the biggest wolf spiders I've encountered, massive as they can be, don't compare. And the strangest part, it wasn't just the size. It was the feeling. That overwhelming sense that it was watching me just as closely as I was watching it. That it wasn't just some mindless insect skittering around, but something more. Even now, I don't look back on it with fear. If anything, I'm more fascinated than anything else. But sometimes late at night, when I think about that thing and the way it just sat there in the dark, I get a weird, crawling feeling down my spine. Because really, what was it? And why, after all these years, do I still feel like it was watching me? None of this story is embellished or made up in any way. This happened just a few weeks ago, and I'll never forget it. I had a guy friend of mine staying with me in my dorm room for the weekend of his birthday. My dorm isn't a normal one. It's inside a house that was built over 100 years ago. The floors creak no matter how carefully you walk, the windows rattle when the wind picks up, and sometimes, when the house settles, it makes this deep groaning sound, like something shifting just beneath the surface. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like you're never really alone, even when you are. We went to bed late that night, sometime around midnight. It had been a long day of hanging out, walking around town, and celebrating his birthday. We were exhausted, and sleep came quickly. But at around 3:30 in the morning, both of us woke up at the same time. Not groggy or half asleep, fully, completely awake. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe something had made a noise that startled us both awake, though I couldn't remember hearing anything. The air in my room felt heavier than usual, like the space itself was pressing in just a little bit. I shifted under my blanket, trying to shake off the strange feeling. We stayed in bed for a while, just talking. At some point, our conversation turned to ghosts. I've never liked the idea of ghosts. Even as a kid, I avoided horror movies, never played with Ouija boards, and refused to listen to scary stories before bed. My friend, of course, thought this was hilarious. He teased me about it, laughing as he tried to convince me ghosts weren't real. And then, right in the middle of him talking, my bedroom lights flickered and went out. It was so sudden that we both stopped talking immediately. The room was plunged into complete darkness, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. After a few moments of silence, I forced myself to move, slipping out of bed and opening my door to check if the power had gone out in the rest of the house. Everything else was fine. The hallway light was still on. The soft yellow glow from downstairs told me that the living room was still lit. Every other room still had power, except mine. My stomach twisted, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just a blown fuse or a loose connection. It was an old house, after all. I went back inside and sat on my bed, my friend watching me with a raised eyebrow. He could tell I was rattled, but I wasn't going to let him know how much. We distracted ourselves by scrolling through Reddit on my phone, reading random posts, trying to laugh and forget about what had just happened. After a while, the lights came back on as suddenly as they had turned off. Just like that, the room was bright again, and the strange feeling from before seemed to lessen. But 20 minutes later, the lights went out again. This time, we didn't bother checking the rest of the house. I told my friend we should just try to sleep. Maybe whatever was wrong would fix itself by morning. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Just the wiring, just the age of the house, just something normal. But then I saw them. Even in the complete darkness of my room, I could see them clearly. Two glowing eyes in the upper right-hand corner of the room, near the ceiling. They weren't reflections, they weren't tricks of the light. There was no light, but they were there, staring down at us. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to believe it was my imagination. I wanted to believe my mind was playing tricks on me, but before I could say anything, my friend whispered, "Do you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew we were seeing the same thing. The eyes were there, unwavering, watching. And beneath them, in that same corner of the room, was a patch of darkness that was darker than the rest of the room. A kind of blackness that looked like it had depth, like it stretched beyond the walls, like something was there and wasn't supposed to be. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke after that. I don't remember when I closed my eyes, but at some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next night, I wanted answers. I turned off every single light and blocked out any possible source of illumination, trying to recreate the conditions from the night before. I wanted to prove to myself that the eyes were just some kind of reflection, that they had to have been caused by something in the room. But when I looked back to that same corner, there was nothing. Just an empty patch of ceiling, as it should have been. No eyes. No impossible darkness. Nothing at all. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't, because that meant whatever we had seen hadn't been a trick of the light. It hadn't been some random coincidence of angles and shadows. It had been real. And the worst part, that feeling of being watched never went away. Even now, weeks later, I still feel it. That corner of my room feels different from the rest. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself staring at it without knowing why. I haven't seen the eyes again, but I don't think I need to. I know they're still there. Last week, on the last night of my fall break, me and two friends, Ethan and Marcus, decided to make the most of it. We weren't doing anything crazy, just lighting a fire down at the creek near my house, something we'd done plenty of times before. It wasn't exactly legal, but it wasn't hurting anyone either. Just a way to kill time and enjoy the cool air of an October night. Around 10:30, we gathered a bunch of flammable junk, some newspaper, old homework, and a few dry branches we found lying around. We walked down to our usual spot, a small clearing on a cliff above the creek where no one could see us from the road or the nearby houses. It was private, quiet, and the perfect place to mess around without anyone bothering us. The fire started quickly. We sat around, feeding it little by little, watching the flames dance in the darkness. The warmth felt nice against the chilly air, and the glow cast weird, flickering shadows on our faces. We joked, laughed, and just talked about random stuff, girls, school, stupid things we'd seen online. It felt like a perfect way to end the break. After about 20 minutes, we stomped the fire out, making sure nothing was left burning, and decided to walk to McDonald's. It was only a few blocks away, and we were all craving something greasy. To get there, We had to cross a large open field, and then a busy street. The field was mostly empty, with patches of dead grass and scattered bits of trash. I was in front, with Ethan and Marcus walking behind me, talking about something I wasn't really listening to. The field was dark, but I could make out shapes, trees, a few parked cars near the houses in the distance, and something else. A long, dark shape lying in the grass. At first, I thought it was just some old camping gear someone had dumped. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a pile of junk. It was a sleeping bag. My stomach dropped. Something about the way it was lying there felt wrong. It wasn't just abandoned, it looked occupied. I slowed down. My breath caught in my throat as I took a closer look. That's when I saw it, a head at the end of the sleeping bag, barely visible in the dim light. The way it rested on the ground made my chest tighten with a strange kind of fear I'd never felt before. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my body wouldn't move. Then, without thinking, I blurted out, "Dead body." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I wasn't even the one saying them. Panic shot through me like electricity. I turned and bolted, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan and Marcus didn't even hesitate. They ran right after me, no questions asked. We didn't stop until we reached McDonald's. Out of breath, we leaned against the wall near the parking lot, adrenaline still surging through us. For a moment, there was silence. Then, we burst out laughing. Not because it was funny, but because we were so on edge that our bodies didn't know what else to do. Ethan wiped sweat off his forehead. "Dude, you face-planted so hard." I didn't even care. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I swear to God, it was a body. Marcus shook his head, still grinning. It could have been a homeless guy sleeping. That thought hadn't even crossed my mind. Maybe it was just someone sleeping. Maybe we had scared ourselves over nothing. But something about the way it had looked, the stillness, the unnatural way the head rested, told me otherwise. After a few minutes, the nervous laughter died down. That's when the idea came up. We had to go back and check. But we weren't going empty-handed. We needed a weapon, just in case. We walked to a friend's house, told him what happened, and after some convincing, he handed us a spare kitchen knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. By the time we got back to the field, it was close to midnight. The air was even colder now, the kind that settles into your bones. We stood at the edge of the field, flashlights in hand, cameras ready, but no one really wanted to go first. I swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Let's just do this." Ethan and Marcus followed, flanking me on both sides. The field felt different now, heavier somehow. Our footsteps crunched against the dry grass as we moved toward the spot where we'd seen it. As we approached, my heart pounded harder. My flashlight beam shook slightly in my hand. When we reached the place where the sleeping bag had been, I shined the light forward, and my stomach turned to ice. It was still there, the same position, the same unnatural stillness. I took a step closer. The flashlight caught on something, the edge of a beanie pulled down over the head. The face was hidden, but the neck was exposed, pale and unmoving. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but I forced myself to stay still. Then Ethan whispered, "What if he's alive?" That thought was even worse. If he was dead, at least he wasn't aware of us standing over him. But if he was alive, was he dangerous? Injured? I stepped closer, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. The flashlight beam hovered over the body, but nothing moved. Not a single breath. Not a twitch. I took another step. A car passed on the street nearby, its headlights briefly sweeping across the field. In that instant, I saw it clearly. The skin was wrong. Too pale. Too stiff. The way the head lay on the ground wasn't natural. No rise and fall of breath. No reaction to the light. We ran. We didn't stop until we were back at my house, locked inside, lights on. No one spoke for a long time. We just sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what we had seen. The next morning, we went back in daylight. Nothing. No sleeping bag. No body. Not even an imprint in the grass. It was as if nothing had ever been there. The field was empty. The world was normal again. But I knew what I had seen. We all did. And the scariest part? If it had been a body, someone had taken it. I was 10 years old, and the excitement of spending Canada Day weekend with my older sister was almost too much to handle. She had moved to a small town about an hour and a half away from the farm where we grew up, and this was my first time visiting her new place. My mom was driving me there, and I couldn't stop talking about how much fun it was going to be. My sister was 10 years older than me, and even though she was an adult now, we were still close. She was my hero, and I couldn't wait to see her. The drive was uneventful. The sun was shining, the fields stretched out endlessly on either side of the highway, and the radio played softly in the background. I remember staring out the window, watching the telephone poles zip by, counting them to pass the time. My mom hummed along to the music, occasionally glancing over at me with a smile. Everything felt normal, like any other summer day. But as soon as we pulled up to my sister's house, something changed. I didn't notice it at first. I was too busy jumping out of the car, eager to see my sister and explore her new place. The house was small, a little rundown, but charming in its own way. It had a front porch with a creaky wooden swing and a garden that looked like it hadn't been tended to in years. My sister greeted us at the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then it hit me, a wave of nausea, so intense that I had to clutch the doorframe to steady myself. My head spun, and my stomach churned like I was going to throw up. I had never been car sick before, not even on the bumpiest roads, so this was completely out of the blue. My mom and sister exchanged worried glances, but they brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just tired from the drive. They decided I could sleep it off, and my mom left shortly after, promising to pick me up in a couple of days. I didn't argue. I felt too sick to do anything but lie down. My sister led me to a bed on the main floor, a small room just off the living room. The bed was old, the kind with a wrought iron frame and a mattress that sagged in the middle. My sister mentioned offhandedly that the bed had come with the house and that one of the original owners had died in the house years ago. She said it like it was no big deal, but it made me uneasy. Still, I was too exhausted to care. I climbed into the bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep right away. The nausea kept me awake for a while, and I remember staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. It was an old house, and it creaked and groaned with every shift of the wind. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like they were alive. I told myself it was just the house settling, but it didn't help. My imagination ran wild, conjuring images of the previous owner, an old woman who had died in this very room. I could almost see her standing in the corner, watching me with hollow eyes. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. I don't remember dreaming, but I do remember waking up briefly in the middle of the night. The room was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then I heard it, a faint sound like footsteps on the stairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I told myself it was just my sister, maybe going to the bathroom or getting a glass of water. But then I remembered her bedroom was upstairs, and the stairs were right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped, and the house fell silent again. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling or maybe the wind. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but the image of the old woman lingered in my mind. I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. The next morning, my sister seemed annoyed with me. She asked why I kept coming up and down the stairs last night, saying if I needed something, I should have just asked her. I was confused. I hadn't been up at all that night. I told her this, and she frowned. She thought maybe it was her cat, but when we checked, the cat was locked in the basement, just like she said. We both stood there for a moment, staring at each other, neither of us wanting to say what we were thinking. The rest of the weekend passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that house. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the memory of those footsteps stayed with me. A few years later, I was invited to a sleepover at a friend's house in another small town. This town was even smaller than my sister's, almost abandoned, with old houses that looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. My friend's house was at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by fields. It was a 2-story house with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The inside wasn't much better. The floors creaked with every step, and the walls were covered in faded wallpaper that was peeling at the seams. We were all excited to be there, though. There were 7 of us, all girls from school, and we spent the evening playing games and laughing until our sides hurt. We didn't notice how late it was getting until someone pointed out that it was past midnight. We decided to call it a night and set up our sleeping bags in the upstairs bedroom. The stairs to the second floor were enclosed, with a door at the bottom that, when closed, hid everything completely. From the top of the stairs, you could see the light from the main floor shining under the door. It was creepy, but we were too busy having fun to care. Then we heard it, the sound of someone coming up the stairs. We hadn't heard the door open, but we figured it was one of the girl's older brothers, coming to spy on us. We all piled at the top of the stairs, giggling and whispering, ready to scare him. But as the footsteps got closer, we realized something was wrong. The steps were heavy, like someone wearing boots, but there was no one there. The sound stopped right in front of us, on the last step, but the staircase was empty. We were all frozen, staring at the spot where the footsteps had stopped. No one said anything for a long time. Then someone suggested we go to bed, and we all agreed. We didn't talk about what had happened, but I could tell everyone was thinking about it. I was supposed to sleep on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed, but it was too narrow and cramped. The girl above me was much heavier, and I could feel the mattress pressing down on me. I decided to pull my mattress out and sleep on the floor instead. It was more comfortable, and I fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, we decided to investigate the stairs. We wanted to see if there was any explanation for what we had heard. We moved the bunk bed away from the wall to access a hatch that led to some pipes for heating and cooling. As soon as we started sliding the bed, the top bunk collapsed onto the bottom one. The frame was solid metal, welded together, and it should have been sturdy, but it came crashing down with a force that would have seriously injured me if I had still been lying there. We all stood there, staring at the wreckage, too shocked to speak. No one had touched the bed, and there was no reason for it to collapse like that. It was like something had been holding it up, and when we moved it, whatever it was let go. We never did figure out what had happened that night. The footsteps, the collapsing bed, it was all too strange to explain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in that house, something that didn't want us there. I never went back, and I never talked about it again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those heavy footsteps on the stairs, and I wonder if whatever was in that house is still there, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting kids to come along. I never liked that house. It was old, too old, the kind of place where the walls seemed to hold memories. My friend Daniel lived there with his family, and his younger sister, Emily, always invited her friends over for sleepovers because of the house's so-called reputation. Everyone at school had heard the rumors. People swore they had seen things in the windows when no one was home, heard voices when it was empty, felt cold spots in the hallways, even in the dead heat of summer. The house had stood for over a century and a half, and its age showed. The wood groaned under the weight of every footstep, the doors stuck in their warped frames, and the plumbing rattled inside the walls like bones being shaken in a box. The first-floor bathroom was notorious for trapping people. The door had settled strangely, and if you closed it at the wrong angle, the latch would stick, locking whoever was inside until someone from the outside forced it open. It became a kind of ritual at Emily's sleepovers. At least one girl would get stuck at some point and scream for help until someone came to let them out. It was just part of the fun, a small thrill to make their night feel even more like an adventure. But then came that night. Daniel's dad, Mr. Sullivan, was the kind of man who always had an answer for everything. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. To him, the house was just an old building, full of old house problems. That night, he had gone to bed earlier than the girls in the living room, but sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, he woke up thirsty. He came downstairs to get a glass of water, and as he passed the bathroom, he heard it, frantic banging on the door, fists slamming against the wood, the unmistakable sound of someone inside, desperate to get out. A girl's voice, high and panicked, called out. He sighed. He had been through this before, probably a dozen times. One of Emily's friends had gotten themselves stuck again. As he walked over, he spoke in his usual calm, reassuring tone, telling her it was okay, that the house wasn't haunted, that the door was just stuck. He put his hand on the knob and worked at it. The wood was swollen, but with enough force it popped free, and the door swung open. The bathroom was empty. He stood there for a long moment, staring into the small, dimly lit space. The sink, the toilet, the bathtub with its mildew-speckled curtain hanging half open. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the fact that no one was there. His first thought was that the girl must have somehow climbed out the window, but that made no sense. The window was small, barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, and it was still latched from the inside. He checked behind the shower curtain, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. The room was empty, and yet he had heard it, clear as day. The banging, the screaming. He stepped back, heart pounding, and turned toward the living room. He needed to check, needed to make sure. He walked in and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 girls, all curled up in their sleeping bags, deep in sleep. None of them were missing. None of them looked like they had just been trapped in a bathroom, pounding on the door for help. He stood there for a long time, his skin crawling, his throat dry in a way that had nothing to do with thirst. The house had never scared him before, not really, but at that moment, he felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't a ghost, wasn't some floating apparition or glowing-eyed figure in the dark. It was something else, something real, something wrong. He never told Daniel or Emily what happened that night, but after that, he never walked past that bathroom at night again. I'm a little late to this party, but perhaps someone will read it. This is the first time I have actually ever told any living soul. I tried talking about it to my then girlfriend, now wife, but I realized how crazy I sounded and stopped. In reading several similar stories, I feel somewhat comforted knowing other people have experiences like mine. Some see things, others claim it's just an overactive imagination. I don't know what it is, but I've been dealing with it for as long as I can remember. For years now, I have seen things at different times. Things I know aren't real, but that doesn't make them any less unsettling. Almost always, they take the shape of normal human figures, obscured by the shadows. Sometimes, they appear as distinct people. They never speak or interact with me. They are just there, rarely moving, but always watching. It started when I was very young. I would play basketball in our basement. I was little then, maybe 6 or 7. The basement was large, with 2 rooms on opposite ends. The doors were always open, leading into dark spaces that I avoided looking at for too long. I would see movement in those rooms, shadowy figures darting back and forth. Sometimes I caught glimpses of faces watching me. One face still haunts me. His skin was pale, an ashen grayish tan, like something drained of life. He was bald except for the thin horseshoe of long, straggly white hair around the sides of his head. His teeth were horrible, jagged and yellowed, some missing entirely. He never spoke, never moved beyond those doorways, but he watched. It got so bad I eventually refused to go down there alone. My parents never understood why. We moved when I was 12, and the new house's basement felt safer. No shadowy figures, no faces watching me, for a time anyway. As I entered my teens, the strange sightings never fully stopped, but they changed. They became more subtle, appearing in reflections, mirrors, windows, the glossy surface of a turned-off television. Shapes that I knew weren't really there. They were quick, fleeting. Sometimes I would see a shadow in my peripheral vision, but when I turned my head, nothing was there. I told myself it was my eyes playing tricks on me, nothing more. It was easy to ignore them when they were just momentary glimpses. But it got worse. The worst, most vivid encounter happened in my mid-teens. It was late at night, and I was heading downstairs to grab something from the basement. The stairwell leading down had a door to the left that opened into the laundry room. That room was always dark unless the light was turned on. As I descended the stairs, I felt something, a weight in the air, an unease that prickled at the back of my neck. I turned right at the bottom of the stairs, but as I did, something caught my eye. A figure stood in the doorway of the laundry room, just inside the darkness. He was hooded, dressed entirely in black. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his head tilted downward so the hood obscured his face in shadow. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to keep moving. My rational brain told me it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast in just the right way to look like a man standing there. But just before the doorway left my sight, the figure moved. His head lifted, and I saw his eyes. Pale blue, normal, human eyes, which somehow made it worse. If they had been glowing red or black voids, I could have dismissed it as some irrational fear, but these were just eyes. Ordinary, yet so full of something that made my skin crawl. I turned away quickly, walking faster into the basement. My heart pounded in my chest as I yanked the chain for the light. The moment the bulb flickered on, the oppressive feeling vanished. The laundry room was empty. I stood there for a long time, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself. I convinced myself I was just tired, just imagining things. But that didn't explain the dread that had settled into my bones. It happened again, and again, 3 more times over the next few months, the exact same scenario. Always the hooded figure, always standing in the doorway, always lifting his head just as I turned away. Each time, the feeling of dread worsened. A cold, suffocating presence that made my hair stand on end. Eventually, I got fed up with it. I was too old to be scared of the dark, too old to be scared of something that wasn't real. So I forced myself to ignore it, and eventually it stopped. But it wasn't over. Years passed. I saw things occasionally, but nothing as intense as the hooded figure. They became background noise, quick flashes in the dark, shapes in my peripheral vision that I refused to acknowledge. If I didn't react, they had no power over me. That's what I told myself, anyway. Then one time, my girlfriend, now my wife, almost noticed. We were on vacation in the Outer Banks with her family and some friends. One night, we walked to the fishing pier, just talking and enjoying the ocean breeze. At one point, I became aware of someone standing close to me on my left, opposite my girlfriend. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, blonde hair, staring up at me. I felt an odd familiarity, but I couldn't place her. I kept glancing at her, unable to shake the feeling that she didn't belong. My girlfriend noticed. "What are you looking at?" she asked. That was the moment I knew the girl wasn't really there. My girlfriend had no idea what I was seeing. I didn't respond. I just turned away, pretending I hadn't seen anything at all. The girl never appeared again. That was the only time I ever saw something so vividly in broad daylight. One more thing happened that I've never been able to explain. When I was around 13, I started having a recurring experience at night. My bed was against the wall, and I slept facing it, almost wedged up against it for security. But on the exposed side, I would feel something. A presence. Slowly, a shape would rise beside my bed. First, just the tips of 2 white ears, then more of its head, emerging in an agonizingly slow, deliberate movement. A white werewolf, completely silent, would rise until it was staring down at me, snarling without a sound. Its lips pulled back over sharp teeth, but it made no noise. The terror was paralyzing. I would roll over and bury myself under my blanket, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would hear. It happened so often that one night, I forced myself to fight back. I sat up, turned toward it, and reached out. My hand passed through nothing but air. That was when I knew. I had always known deep down, but confirming it was different. It wasn't real. And yet, knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. Now, nothing really happens anymore. I still sleep poorly, always have. Maybe that's why I see things. But when I wake in the middle of the night, I refuse to look around. If there's something there, I don't acknowledge it. I don't react. It's just a part of my life now. Like a background detail, an occasional flicker in the corner of my vision that I choose to ignore. Maybe that's all it ever was. Maybe that's all it will ever be. It was just another night, nothing special. Me and my buddy Ryan decided to make a quick run to the convenience store down the block to pick up some supplies. College essentials, beer, smokes, maybe some snacks if we were feeling it. The walk was nothing out of the ordinary. Streetlights buzzed, cars rolled by, and the air had that slightly damp chill that comes with the late-night hours. The store was the same as always, bright fluorescent lights, and the stale smell of cheap snacks and cleaning products. We grabbed our stuff, paid, and stepped back out into the night, the paper bag rustling as we walked. The way back was just as normal, until it wasn't. We were halfway to campus when I noticed something in the sky. A red light. Not blinking like an airplane, not moving like a drone. It was just there, staring at us like an unblinking eye. It wasn't until I pointed it out that Ryan stopped walking. As we stood there, staring, 2 more appeared in a perfect line with the first. They weren't as bright, but they were definitely there. Something about them made my stomach twist. Then, as if they knew we were watching, the lights shifted. They got brighter, almost blinding, and moved into a perfect triangle. It was so precise, so unnatural, that I felt my skin crawl. Then, just as suddenly, they dimmed. A sound followed, so low and deep that I could feel it in my chest. It was like standing next to an idling freight train, that kind of heavy hum that you don't hear so much as feel. It wasn't coming from the city. It wasn't from a car or a plane. It was coming from above us. From them. A pressure started to build in my head, like a migraine coming on all at once. My ears popped, my stomach turned, and my body felt wrong, like I was being squeezed by something I couldn't see. My vision blurred for a second, and I turned to Ryan. His face was twisted in pain, his hands gripping the side of his head. We didn't speak. We couldn't. It felt like we were underwater, like gravity itself had changed around us. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on us like a weight we couldn't shake. We forced ourselves to move, to break our gaze from the lights and keep walking. Briskly at first, then faster. The campus wasn't far. We just needed to make it there. The moment we looked away, the pain eased, just a little, like whatever was pressing down on us had loosened its grip. We didn't look back. We just walked, faster and faster, trying to ignore the heat we could still feel on our backs, the static in the air that made every hair on my body stand on end. Then it hit. Hard, like being slammed into a wall without ever moving. A splitting pain cracked through my skull, so intense I almost dropped to my knees. My vision went white. My ears rang so loud I thought my eardrums had burst. My entire body locked up, muscles frozen, lungs refusing to take in air. Ryan was the same, locked in place, his mouth open in a silent scream. The lights were above us now, not distant in the sky, not far away. Directly above us, close enough that I could feel them, not just their heat, but something more. A force, a presence, something I couldn't understand. They vibrated, shifting in and out of focus like they were there, and not there at the same time. My skin burned, my bones ached. My brain felt like it was being stretched and pulled in ways it wasn't meant to. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world around me faded. The only thing that existed was those lights, that pressure, that feeling of being trapped in something beyond my comprehension. Then nothing. No sound. No light. No pressure. Just silence. I gasped, stumbled, my knees nearly giving out beneath me. Ryan did the same, both of us shaking, sweating, breathing like we had just run for miles. The street was empty. The sky was dark. The air was still. The only evidence that anything had happened was the way our bodies ached, the way our heads throbbed, the way the world felt just slightly off, like we had been moved without knowing it. We practically ran back to our dorm. We tried to explain it to our roommates, but they just laughed, said we must have been seeing things. Maybe the beer was hitting us early. But we knew. We weren't drunk. We weren't high. We saw something. We felt something. Something saw us. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked up at the sky, I half expected to see those lights again, waiting, watching. But they never came back. Still, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that, whatever it wasn't meant for us to see. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind that feels endless when you're a teenager. School had just let out, and the air was thick with that restless energy that comes with the weekend. My friend Jake and I were sitting in his room, the blinds half closed, letting in just enough sunlight to make the room feel hazy. We were both 17, invincible in that way only teenagers can be, and we decided to eat some mushrooms. We'd done it before, a few times actually, and it had always been fun, colors brighter, sounds sharper, the world feeling like it was alive in a way it normally wasn't. We each ate an eighth, like we always did, and settled in to wait for the trip to kick in. At first, it was fine. Better than fine, even. We were laughing, the kind of laughter that feels like it's coming from somewhere deep inside you, like your whole body is part of the joke. The walls seemed to breathe, and the music playing from Jake's stereo sounded like it was wrapping around us, filling the room with something warm and electric. But then slowly, things started to shift. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but at some point, the laughter felt forced, and the colors that had been so vibrant started to feel too bright, almost aggressive. My stomach turned, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the mushrooms, that it would pass, but the feeling only got worse. "I don't feel good," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Jake looked at me, his face blurring in and out of focus. He said something, but I couldn't make out the words. My head felt heavy, like it was filled with lead, and my vision started to tunnel. I remember thinking, I need to get home. It was the only thought that made sense in the chaos of my mind. I needed to be in my own bed, in my own house, where everything was familiar and safe. "Can you drive me home?" I asked Jake, my voice shaky. He nodded, but his face was pale, and his eyes looked glassy. I knew he wasn't feeling great either, but he said he was okay to drive. I trusted him. We'd been friends for years, and he'd always been the responsible one, the one who thought things through. I grabbed my keys and stumbled out the door, the sunlight hitting me like a physical force. The world felt too big, too open, and I just wanted to be somewhere small and dark. We got to my car, and I climbed into the passenger seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the seatbelt. I couldn't get it to click, and after a few tries, I gave up. Jake got behind the wheel, and I asked him again if he was sure he was okay to drive. He said he was, his voice steady, and I believed him. He started the car, and we pulled out onto the street. Jake's house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, and we needed to turn around to head toward my place. He drove slowly, carefully, and for a moment, I thought maybe everything would be okay. But then it happened. My mind, already racing from the mushrooms, latched onto a thought, a single, terrifying idea that seemed to come out of nowhere. What if we just drove as fast as possible into whatever we hit first? That would end this bad trip. Yeah. It was a crazy thought, the kind of thing that would never cross my mind under normal circumstances. But in that moment, it felt almost logical. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the thought wouldn't go away. It was like a seed had been planted in my brain, and it was growing, spreading, taking over. And then, before I could say anything, before I could even process what was happening, Jake's body jerked. His hands tightened on the wheel, and his foot slammed down on the gas pedal. The car shot forward, the engine roaring, and I felt my stomach drop. I turned to look at him, and his face was blank, his eyes staring straight ahead but seeing nothing. He was having a seizure, a full-blown, mushroom-induced seizure, and he was still pressing down on the gas. The car was speeding down the street, the houses blurring past us, and I knew we were going to crash. I knew it with a certainty that made my blood run cold. I wanted to scream, to grab the wheel, to do something, but I was frozen, my body refusing to obey the commands my brain was screaming at it. The world outside the windows was a smear of color and light, and inside the car, everything felt slow, like time had stretched out and was moving through molasses. I thought about my parents, about how they'd find out what had happened. I thought about Jake, about how he'd been my best friend since we were kids, and how this might be the last time I ever saw him. I thought about how stupid we'd been, how reckless, and how none of this would have happened if we'd just stayed at his house. But most of all, I thought about how I didn't want to die. Not like this. Not in a car crash on a quiet suburban street, because of some stupid decision we'd made on a Friday afternoon. The car hit the curb, and for a split second, we were airborne. I remember the sound of glass breaking, the crunch of metal, the way the world seemed to tilt and spin. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the ground, my ears ringing and my head pounding. I could hear voices, distant and muffled, and I realized I was outside the car. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, but I was alive. I sat up slowly, my body aching, and looked around. The car was halfway through the front window of a house, the windshield shattered, the hood crumpled. Jake was a few feet away, sitting on the ground, his face pale and his hands shaking. He looked at me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared at each other, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Somehow, neither of us was seriously hurt. We had a few scratches and bruises, but that was it. The people who lived in the house came running out, shouting, asking if we were okay. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, and my chest was heavy with a mix of relief and guilt. We'd destroyed someone's home, and we'd almost died, all because of a stupid decision we'd made on a whim. The police came, and the ambulance, and we were taken to the hospital. They kept us overnight for observation, but we were fine. Physically, at least. Mentally, it was a different story. I couldn't stop replaying the crash in my head, the sound of the glass breaking, the feeling of the car lifting off the ground. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd come to dying. The next few months were a blur. There were court dates, insurance claims, and a lot of angry conversations with our parents. Jake and I didn't talk much during that time. It wasn't that we were mad at each other. It was more that we didn't know what to say. How do you even begin to process something like that? How do you go back to being normal after you've stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale? Eventually, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. Jake and I started hanging out again, but things were different. We were more careful, more aware of our own mortality. We didn't talk about the crash much, but it was always there, lurking in the background, a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. Then, about a year later, we were standing outside Jake's house, just shooting the breeze like we used to. It was a quiet night, the kind where the air feels still and the world seems to hold its breath. We were talking about nothing in particular when Jake suddenly stopped mid-sentence and held up a hand. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "Do you hear that?" I frowned, straining to hear whatever it was he was talking about. And then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound, like an alarm. It was coming from somewhere down the street, and it sent a chill down my spine. It was the same alarm that had gone off the night of the crash, the one from the house we'd smashed into. We stood there for a moment, neither of us saying anything. The sound was faint, but it was unmistakable. It was the same alarm, the same house. I don't know why it was going off again, but hearing it felt like a punch to the gut. It brought everything back, the fear, the guilt, the sheer terror of those few seconds before the crash. It was like the past had reached out and grabbed us, reminding us that we couldn't escape it, no matter how much time had passed. We didn't talk about it after that. We just stood there, listening to the alarm, until it finally stopped. And then we went back to talking like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the crash wasn't just something that had happened to us. It was something that would always be a part of us, a scar that would never fully heal. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the alarm still echoing in my mind. I thought about how close we'd come to dying, about how one stupid decision could change everything. And I thought about how lucky we were to have survived, to have been given a second chance. But even as I thought about all of that, I couldn't shake the feeling that the crash wasn't really over, that it would always be there, lurking in the background, waiting to remind us of what had happened. And maybe that's the thing about near-death experiences. They don't just end when the danger is over. They stay with you, shaping the way you see the world, the way you live your life. They become a part of you, a shadow that follows you wherever you go. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how much you try to move on, they're always there, a reminder of how fragile life really is. When I was a kid, I lived in a house that still haunts my memories. Even today, when I think about the things I saw and heard there, I get a lump in my throat and a chill down my spine. Most of my family refuses to talk about it. Maybe they didn't see anything, or maybe they just don't want to admit it. But my younger cousins have told me that they never felt right in that house. They had nightmares every time they stayed over. Something about it was just wrong. The story that stays with me the most, the one I think about every time I wake up in the middle of the night, is what I call the voice. It was sometime past 3 a.m. when I woke up feeling unusually thirsty. The air in my room felt heavy, like the walls were pressing in on me. I didn't think much of it at first. I got out of bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and started walking toward the stairs. That's when I noticed how quiet everything was. It wasn't just normal nighttime quiet. It was an unnatural kind of silence, like the house itself was holding its breath. The moment I reached the top of the stairs, the feeling got worse. The air felt thicker, like I was walking through something invisible. I hesitated, but I told myself I was being stupid. It was just my imagination. I took my first step down. The second my foot touched the stair, the heavy feeling turned into something else, something almost suffocating. I took another step, and the floor let out a loud, drawn-out creak. Then, right next to my ear, I heard it. A wheezing inhale, like someone struggling to breathe, followed by a raspy chuckle. Heh heh heh. It's time. I screamed. I don't mean I gasped. I don't mean I yelled. I screamed so loud my throat burned. I turned and ran back up the stairs as fast as my legs could move, practically diving into my mother's room. I crawled under her covers and lay there, shaking, for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. When morning came, I asked my mom and my grandparents if they'd heard anything. They all looked at me like I was crazy. No one heard a thing, they said. No one. I had been less than 10 feet from my mom's door, and she hadn't heard me scream at the top of my lungs? My grandparents' room was even closer. How could they not have heard it? I wanted to believe I had imagined it. Maybe I was half asleep, dreaming while I was awake. Maybe I had freaked myself out in the dark. But then it happened again. This time, I was sitting in the hallway, talking to my mom. We had paused in our conversation, and she turned around to do something. That's when I heard it, right against my ear. The same voice, the same horrible, rasping breath. He he he. It's time. I jumped up so fast I knocked over a chair. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. My mom turned around, startled. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. You didn't hear that?" I stammered. She just frowned and shook her head. "Hear what?" I didn't even know what to say. I didn't know how to explain it. I just stood there, my hands shaking, staring at her like she had lost her mind. How could she not have heard it? It had been so loud, so close. After that, I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But the voice wasn't done with me. The worst experience happened during a power outage. A storm had knocked out the electricity, and I had fallen asleep in my mom's bed. I woke up sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning. The room was pitch black, and the house was completely silent. About 5 minutes later, the power came back on. The sudden hum of the refrigerator kicking in made me jump. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, deciding to check the time. Back then, we had this thing where you could call a number and hear the exact time. I picked up the phone, dialed 853-1212 and waited. The line rang once, then again, then, click. Instead of the usual robotic voice, there was nothing but static for a second. Then through the speaker, clear as day, I heard it again. He he he. It's time. I threw the phone so hard it bounced off the nightstand and hit the floor. My whole body was ice cold. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. My mom was still asleep next to me, completely undisturbed. She hadn't even stirred when I screamed. That was the night I stopped trying to pretend it wasn't real. The voice wasn't in my head. It wasn't my imagination. It was something else. And for whatever reason, I was the only one who could hear it. Over time, it didn't stop, but I got used to it. Sometimes I'd be walking past the dining room, the one place in the house that always felt the worst, and I'd hear it whisper my name. Sometimes I'd be lying in bed, on the edge of sleep, and I'd hear that awful, wheezing laugh right next to my ear. But I never responded. I never spoke to it. I never acknowledged it out loud. I don't know if that made a difference, but eventually, after we moved out of that house, I never heard it again. I've never gone back. Not once. Even though the house still stands, even though other people live there now, I want nothing to do with it. Whatever was in that house, whatever whispered to me in the dark, I never want to hear it again. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it chose me. But I know one thing for sure. If I had ever answered it, I don't think I would be here to tell this story. I never believed in premonitions. Dreams, to me, were just the mind's way of working through the day's leftovers, fragmented memories stitched into something that sometimes made sense and sometimes didn't. But after what happened to my sister, I started to question everything I thought I knew. She told me her story years after it happened, during a quiet moment at a family reunion. We had slipped away from the noise of relatives laughing and talking, stepping outside to walk along the dirt road near my aunt's house. The summer air was thick with humidity, the sky a deep purple as the sun set, and there was a distant hum of crickets. I never expected the conversation we had that night to shake me to my core. She told me about the dreams. For years, since she was a small child, she had been having the same recurring nightmare. Night after night, she would see wolves with thick black fur and piercing red eyes creeping into our father's garage. She would hear the low growl of the wolves and our father's screams. In the dream, she would run toward him, desperate to help, but the wolves would always attack her, knocking her away, sinking their teeth into her arms and legs, pushing her back as she fought. No matter what she did, she could never save him. The wolves always won. The dream haunted her, coming back almost every night. She tried to push it aside, to forget about it, but the fear lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. It was just a dream, she told herself. It didn't mean anything. Then came that night. The night that changed everything. It was New Year's Eve. My parents were out celebrating, while I stayed home babysitting my sister and 2 other kids. It was cold outside, bitterly cold, and the wind howled through the trees. We were in the living room, watching TV, bundled up in blankets, when I felt it, a chill. A strange, unnatural chill that wasn't just from the winter air. I remember looking around, seeing my sister pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The younger kids didn't seem to notice, too focused on their game, but she and I exchanged a glance. Something felt wrong. A few minutes passed. Then we heard it. A scream. A gut-wrenching, desperate scream, echoing through the night. It was our mother outside, screaming our father's name over and over. My heart slammed against my ribs as I jumped to my feet. My sister was already moving, running toward the basement. I barely had time to process what was happening before my mother burst through the front door, her face pale and wild with panic. "Call 911. Your father, he's." She couldn't finish. The words strangled in her throat, but we didn't need to hear them. We already knew. I scrambled for the phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. My sister reappeared from the basement, her arms full of winter coats. She was layering them on herself frantically, pulling one on after the other, her movements rushed and desperate. I didn't understand at the time. I thought maybe she was in shock, trying to protect herself from the cold. Now I wonder if she was trying to protect herself from something else. We didn't go outside. I wouldn't let her. Instead, we stood in front of the playroom window, staring out into the night. I could see the garage, the light above it flickering weakly. And I could see my father's legs, lying motionless just beyond the open door. There was blood, dark against the snow, pooling around his body. My stomach twisted into knots, and I felt my sister trembling beside me. The ambulance came. The flashing lights painted the house in shades of red and blue. They took him away, but we already knew. He was gone. He had been gone the moment our mother screamed. And just like that, my sister never had the wolf dream again. She told me all of this as we walked that evening, her voice shaking, her fingers gripping her arms as though she were trying to hold herself together. When she finished, we both stopped walking, standing there in the middle of the road, crying silently. The night was quiet around us, but I felt a weight in the air, something heavy and suffocating, something neither of us could name. After a long time, she spoke again. "My father's father died when he was 12, she said, "and my dad was the youngest of 11 siblings." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it sent a shiver down my spine. There was something about it, about the pattern, about the way history had repeated itself in such an eerie way. Neither of us knew what to make of it. We didn't talk about fate or curses or premonitions. We didn't try to explain it. We just stood there, in the darkness, letting the weight of it settle over us. And we never spoke of it again. It was the night of February 14th, 1989. I remember it clearly because it was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that makes your breath come out in thick clouds and stings your fingers even through gloves. My girlfriend and I had been driving for a while, heading back from a small gathering with some friends outside of town. The roads were mostly empty, save for the occasional passing car, and the dark sky stretched above us, scattered with stars. Biscay, Minnesota, was just another quiet town, the kind where people turned in early, where the fields stretched out in all directions, flat and featureless under the dim glow of scattered streetlights. It was late, probably close to midnight, when we first saw them. At first, they were just lights in the distance, red and green, unmoving against the darkness. My girlfriend spotted them first and pointed. "Those look like smokestacks," she said. I glanced in the direction she was pointing. At first, I could see what she meant. Two vertical lights, one red, one green, standing side by side against the night sky. But something about them seemed off. There was no factory or facility nearby, no buildings tall enough to have stacks like that. Just an open field. I frowned, watching them. Something wasn't right. "Those aren't smokestacks," I said. As we drove closer, I could make out the shapes behind the lights, solid, dark, angular forms that loomed against the sky. They weren't fixed structures. They were aircraft, hovering completely still, just above the ground. "Pull over," I said. She hesitated but obeyed, easing the car onto the shoulder. The moment we stopped, the aircraft seemed to react. The two black triangles began to move, silently gliding forward. My girlfriend gripped my arm. "Let's go," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. But I wasn't afraid. I was fascinated. I had never seen anything like them before. I stepped out of the car, my breath puffing white in the cold air. The aircraft moved toward us slowly, no faster than a person jogging, as if they were watching us just as we were watching them. As they passed overhead, the light from a nearby sodium vapor street lamp illuminated them just enough for me to see more details. They were unlike any jets I had ever seen. They were large, with a truck-like build, not sleek or streamlined. The surfaces were angular, almost crude, lacking the smooth aerodynamic curves of most modern aircraft. The wings stretched out wide, and at the rear, two downward-canted tailplanes tapered off into conical tips. The strangest part, though, was the silence. I had been around aircraft before. My neighbor was a pilot for Northwest Airlines, and I had been to air shows. I knew the sound a jet made, especially when it hovered. Harrier jump jets, F-35s, when they used vertical takeoff and landing, they were incredibly loud, their engines producing an ear-splitting roar. But these planes made barely any noise at all. There was a soft hum, the faintest whir of machinery, but nothing close to what I would have expected. Underneath, just behind where the landing gear would have been recessed, two yellowish-white lights pointed straight down, illuminating the ground beneath them. A rotating red beacon pulsed under the nose of each craft. The cockpits were barely visible, shadowed, the canopies blending into the dark fuselage. If there were pilots inside, I couldn't see them. The aircraft continued forward at their slow, deliberate pace. I raised a hand and waved. The moment I did, I heard it. Their engines spooled up, a rising whine that sent a chill down my spine. Almost as if they had acknowledged my presence, they veered south to southeast, gaining speed. I turned and ran back to the car. "Follow them," I said. My girlfriend hesitated, but threw the car into drive. We turned around and sped down the road, trying to keep up. For a short while, we managed to stay close. The aircraft weren't moving too fast at first, still maintaining that slow, controlled pace. But then, without warning, they accelerated. Within moments, they had pulled away, leaving us behind in the darkness. We kept driving, watching as their lights grew smaller and smaller, until they were gone. I sat back in my seat, staring ahead, my mind racing. "What the hell was that?" my girlfriend asked. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. The next day, I spoke to my neighbor, the pilot. I asked if there was anything special about Biscay, any reason why unusual aircraft might be flying through. He told me that sometimes, the area was used as a transit corridor for aircraft moving from one part of the country to another. That explanation made sense for conventional aircraft, but not for what I had seen. I started asking around, trying to find any information I could. Eventually, through a contact, a report of my sighting reached Jim Goodall, an aviation author who specialized in black projects. He told me that there had been ongoing tests of stealthy VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing, aircraft in the Midwest and Michigan around that time. It's been over 3 decades since that night, and I still think about it. I've never seen anything like those aircraft again. If they were prototypes, they never became publicly known. Maybe they failed to meet expectations and were scrapped, locked away in a classified hangar somewhere. Or maybe, just maybe, they evolved into something else, something still flying out there unseen. I may never know for sure. But one thing is certain, I was lucky to have seen them that night. It was a glimpse of something few people have ever witnessed, and it left me with more questions than answers. I don't know why I'm writing this down. Maybe it's because I haven't thought about it in years, and now it's clawing its way back into my mind, demanding to be told. Maybe it's because I still don't have an explanation. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get it out of my head. It wasn't my experience, not directly. It happened to a friend of mine when we were kids. We grew up in a quiet neighborhood in New England, the kind of place where you knew every house, every backyard, every shortcut through the woods. And the woods were a big part of our childhood. They stretched for miles behind our houses, dense and untamed. As kids, we built forts and played hide-and-seek among the trees, spent entire summers out there, covered in dirt and mosquito bites. But as we got older, the woods changed. Maybe it was just our imaginations, but the air felt different, heavier, like something was watching. We started sticking closer to the edge, where we could still see the rooftops of our houses through the trees. And then eventually we stopped going in altogether. A year after that, my friend had a dream. At least, that's what he told us it was. A dream. But the details never changed, not once, no matter how many times he was asked. In the dream, he woke up, walking out his back door. He didn't remember deciding to leave or opening the door, just that he was already stepping onto the cool grass of his backyard. The moon was bright, lighting everything with an eerie glow. The world was silent, too silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. As he moved toward the woods, he didn't feel afraid. Not yet. But something was different. He said it wasn't like before when the woods felt unwelcome, like it didn't want us there. This time, it was watching him, waiting. Then came the sound. Faint at first, like wind through the branches, but steady. A low hum, rhythmic and distant. Chanting. The kind that didn't belong in those woods, that didn't belong anywhere near where we lived. He didn't know why he kept walking. He said it was like he had no control, like something was pulling him forward. He stepped off the trail, pushing into the brush just as the sound of footsteps reached him. Slow, deliberate steps on the dirt path. He froze. From his hiding spot, he saw them. 6 figures, cloaked in deep red, walking in a straight line. He couldn't see their faces. He could only see how they moved, too smooth, too quiet, like they weren't quite touching the ground. And then the smell hit him. He'd smelled death before. We all had. The woods were full of animals, and sometimes we'd stumble across the decaying bodies of deer or raccoons, the air thick with that sickly sweet rot. This was worse. This was wrong. His stomach churned, nausea rolling over him in waves. He pressed himself against the ground, trying not to breathe. Then the branch snapped. Everything stopped. The chanting, the movement. The air itself felt like it had frozen. Then slowly, all 6 figures turned their heads in unison, facing exactly where he was hiding. He ran. He ran harder than he ever had in his life, the path barely visible beneath the shadows. He could hear them behind him, their footsteps no longer quiet, no longer careful. They were chasing him. When he dared to look back, they were moving in a formation, like birds in flight, a perfect triangle cutting through the darkness. But they weren't running. They were gliding, their robes billowing around them, their faces still hidden. His house was close now. He could see the porch light, his mother's potted plants, the familiarity of safety. But just before he could break through the tree line, his foot caught on something. Not a root, not a rock, something deliberate. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his hands and knees as they scraped against the dirt. He rolled onto his back, expecting to see them standing over him, waiting to take him. But there was only one. A figure loomed above him, its face obscured by a mask, long, curved like a bird's beak, the kind worn during the plague centuries ago. But it wasn't just a mask. The surface was covered in dark gray feathers, blending into the blackness of its hood. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stare. Then, everything went black. When he woke up, he was in his bed, his heart hammering in his chest. For a second, he thought it really had just been a dream. Then he saw the blood. His sheets were smeared with it, his hands and knees stinging, raw with fresh scrapes. He sat up too fast, lightheaded, and that's when it fell from his shirt. A feather, dark gray, almost black, stiff with dried blood. He never talked about it after that. Not willingly. If someone brought it up, his face would go pale, his hands clenching as if to steady himself. He insisted it was just a dream, that he must have hurt himself before bed and forgotten about it, that the feather wasn't real. But he kept it. For years, he kept it tucked away in a shoebox beneath his bed. We saw it once, when he showed it to me and another friend, still crusted with that dark, flaking stain. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was really a dream, if he sleepwalked into the woods, if something followed him back. But I do know that he was the last of us to go in. And whatever he saw, whatever he ran from, was real enough to leave scars. And a feather. In 1993, I was 10 years old, living in California. My great-grandmother had just passed away a few days before, and the house felt heavier than usual. She was old, fragile, and had lived a long life, but death still left a weight in the air. My family was close, and her passing hit everyone hard, especially my uncle. He had been taking care of her toward the end, and I could tell he was struggling with the loss. That afternoon, my cousins and I were at my uncle's house. The 4 of us were piled into the living room, watching whatever was on TV. We were just kids, distracting ourselves with cartoons and each other's company, trying to forget the sadness that had settled over the house in the past few days. The funeral was coming up, and everyone was on edge. My uncle was outside, mowing the lawn, trying to keep busy. I could hear the push mower moving back and forth over the grass, the sound dull but steady. At some point, he took a break. The sound of the mower stopped, and I saw him rested on the concrete slab in the backyard. He wiped sweat off his forehead, looking tired. It was hot that day, the kind of dry California heat that makes the air feel heavy. He went inside to get a drink, and right then, something strange happened. A cold rush of air swept through the room. It wasn't like the kind of breeze that comes in when someone opens a door. It was sharp, unnatural, and it sent a chill straight through me. I could tell my cousins felt it too. They stiffened, looking at each other, but none of us said anything. The room, which had felt normal just a second before, now felt wrong, like we weren't alone. My skin prickled, but I tried to shake it off. It was just a draft, I told myself, just a weird shift in the air. We sat there for a second in silence, the TV still playing in the background, but none of us were really paying attention anymore. Then, we heard my uncle yell, "Oh my God!" His voice was loud, panicked. Without thinking, the four of us jumped up and ran outside, not knowing what to expect. As soon as we got out there, I saw him standing by the lawnmower, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Which one of you guys did this?" he asked, his voice sharp. We all looked at him, confused. Did what? I wanted to ask, but I was too busy trying to figure out what had him so freaked out. He stepped aside and pointed at the concrete, right under the lawnmower. My stomach dropped. There, clear as day, were two letters, MM. They weren't written in chalk or carved into the concrete. They were in the grass stains left behind by the mower, dark green against the pale, sun-bleached cement. The letters were huge, at least a foot tall and a foot and a half wide. It didn't make sense. The mower had only been resting there for a couple of minutes. There was no way the stains could have formed that way, so perfectly, so precisely. But they were there. MM, my great-grandmother's initials. We all just stood there, staring. I felt something cold settle in my chest. My uncle ran his hands through his hair, his breathing uneven. He looked at each of us, waiting for someone to admit it was a joke, but we were just as shocked as he was. None of us had touched the mower. None of us had been outside. We had been sitting in the living room, watching TV, right up until we heard him yell. It didn't make sense. We tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a coincidence, just random grass stains that happened to look like letters. But the marks were too precise, too deliberate. Maybe someone had done it earlier, some prank we hadn't noticed until now. But the mower had been moved all over the yard before he set it down, and the stains had appeared only when it stopped. We took a picture, all of us gathered around the letters, some strange mix of awe and fear in our expressions. My uncle, still shaken, grabbed the hose and tried to wash the stains away. The water darkened the concrete, but when it dried, the letters were still there. We got a pressure washer, blasted the spot for a good few minutes. Still there. The stains didn't fade until days later. Slowly, over time, they grew fainter and fainter until eventually they disappeared altogether. But the memory didn't. Even now, I think about that moment and get chills. I've gone over it in my head more times than I can count, trying to make sense of it. I've heard stories, read about weird coincidences, but nothing ever seems to fit. There was no ghost, no floating figure in the corner of the room, no flickering lights. Just the cold air, the silence, and those two letters staring up at us from the concrete. It wasn't something out of a horror movie. It was real, it happened, and we never figured out why. And maybe that's the part that scares me the most. I've always been the kind of person who brushes things off. You know, the type who laughs at horror movies, who scoffs at ghost stories, who insists there's a logical explanation for everything. But there's something about the things that have happened to me, things that have followed me, or maybe my family, for as long as I can remember, that makes it hard to keep that same energy. It's not like I've ever seen a ghost or anything. No floating sheets, no rattling chains, no creepy little girls with long black hair crawling out of TVs. It's subtler than that. It's the kind of thing that makes you question your own mind, your own memory, your own sanity. And the worst part, it's not just me. It's been there lurking for as long as I've been alive, maybe longer. It starts with my dad. He doesn't talk about it much, but when he does, it's always in this offhand way, like he's trying to convince himself it wasn't a big deal. When he was a baby, my grandma would put him to sleep in his crib and leave the door open. She'd go downstairs, do whatever she needed to do, and then come back up an hour or so later to check on him before she went to bed herself. Most nights, everything was fine, but every now and then, she'd find his door closed. And when she opened it, she'd see him sitting up in his crib, babbling away like he was having a conversation with someone. His eyes would be fixed on the rocking chair in the corner of the room, the one that was always empty, but sometimes still moving, like someone had just been sitting in it. My grandma would scoop him up, close the door behind her, and try to forget about it. But it happened more than once. Enough that she started closing his door herself before she went downstairs, just to be safe. My dad doesn't remember any of this, of course. He was just a baby. But he's told me the story enough times that I can picture it. The dim light from the hallway spilling into the room, the faint creak of the rocking chair, the sound of his own baby voice filling the silence. It's unsettling, sure, but it's easy to write off as one of those weird family stories that gets passed down and exaggerated over the years. Except it doesn't stop there. When I was about 2 years old, we lived in this house with a staircase that took a sharp 90-degree turn halfway up. There was a landing at the turn, and above it, the ceiling stretched up higher than the rest of the house. I don't remember much about that place, but I do remember the stairs. I remember sitting on the landing, looking up at the ceiling, and talking to someone who wasn't there. My parents would find me there sometimes, just sitting and babbling away like I was having a full-on conversation. When they asked me who I was talking to, I'd point up at the ceiling and say, "That man up there." They'd look, of course, but there was never anyone there. Just empty space and the faint smell of dust. I don't remember the man. I don't remember what he looked like or what we talked about, but I remember the feeling of being watched. I remember the way the air seemed heavier up there, like it was pressing down on me. And I remember the way my parents would exchange looks when I said things like that, like they were trying to decide whether I was just being a weird kid or if there was something more to it. Then there's the story my mom tells about when I was a baby. She says one night, she woke up with a start to this weird sound. She doesn't know how to describe it. Not a cry, not a laugh, just this strange noise that came from my room. She didn't hear anything else, but she knew something was wrong. She got up and ran down the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. When she flipped on the light, I wasn't in my crib. She says she started screaming for my dad, and they both started searching the room, frantic. They found me under a toy desk on the other side of the room, sound asleep. I was too young to crawl, let alone climb out of my crib and make my way across the room. They never figured out how I got there. My mom still gets a faraway look in her eyes when she talks about it, like she's trying to piece together something that doesn't make sense. We moved to a suburb of Atlanta when I was a little older, and that's when things started to get stranger. I liked my new room. It was bigger than my old one, with this huge walk-in closet that I used to store all my toys and stuffed animals. But there was something about that closet that always gave me the creeps. It was always cold, even in the middle of a hot Atlanta summer. I'd open the door and feel this rush of icy air, like I was standing in front of an open freezer. And there was this smell, musty and damp, like old books or wet leaves. I tried to avoid going in there as much as possible, but sometimes I couldn't help it. I'd have to grab a toy or put something away, and every time, I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. One night, I was lying in bed, facing the wall. My bed was in the middle of the room, with the headboard against one wall and space on either side. The closet was behind me, and the light was on, casting a soft glow onto the wall in front of me. I was almost asleep when I got that feeling again, the one that made my skin crawl and my stomach twist. I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw it. The silhouette of a man, tall and thin, standing in the light from the closet. He was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned fedora, and his shadow stretched across the wall in front of me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to move, to do anything, but I couldn't. I just lay there, staring at the shadow, waiting for it to do something. After what felt like forever, it turned and walked back into the closet, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep in my room that night. I ran to my parents' room and begged them to let me sleep with them. They thought I'd had a nightmare, and no matter how much I tried to explain, they didn't believe me. The next day, they made me go back to my room like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was still there, watching me. A few weeks later, something else happened. My dog, Monroe, was sleeping on my bed. She didn't usually sleep in my room. She preferred the living room or my parents' room. But that night, she was curled up at the foot of my bed, snoring softly. I remember feeling a little safer with her there, like she was keeping watch. But around 2 a.m., she suddenly stood up, her body tense and rigid. I woke up to the sound of her growling, low and deep, like nothing I'd ever heard from her before. Her teeth were bared, her hackles raised, and she was staring straight at the closet. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there. Just the open door and the darkness beyond. Monroe didn't stop growling. She didn't even look at me. It was like she was focused on something I couldn't see. After a few seconds, she let out this sharp bark and jumped off the bed, still growling. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my pillow and followed her out of the room, my heart racing. We spent the rest of the night in the guest room, and I didn't go back to my room for days. Monroe was my protector after that. She slept in my room every night, always on alert, always watching the closet. And for a while, things were quiet. But every now and then, I'd catch her staring at the closet, her ears twitching like she was listening to something. And every time, I'd get that same cold, prickling feeling on the back of my neck. We moved to South Florida a few years later, and for the most part, the weirdness stopped. Or at least, it became easier to explain away. The stereo would turn itself on sometimes, but it was an old system, so I figured it was just a glitch. The TV would do the same thing, but again, it was old. The whispering was harder to explain. My mom and I would hear it sometimes, usually late at night. It was always faint, just on the edge of hearing, like someone was talking in another room. I'd get up to check, thinking maybe someone had left the TV on, but the house would be dark and silent. My mom heard it too, though, so at least I knew I wasn't going crazy. The weirdest thing that happened in Florida was with my other dog, a sweet but skittish little thing named Daisy. One night, I found her sitting in the middle of the living room, just staring at the wall. All the doors were closed, so I couldn't figure out how she'd gotten in there. She was shaking like a leaf, her tail tucked between her legs, and she wouldn't respond to me. I picked her up and carried her back to my room, but she didn't stop shaking for hours. I still don't know what spooked her, but I can't help thinking it was the same thing that had been following me all those years. Monroe's old now. She's got arthritis, and she doesn't move as fast as she used to. She spends most of her days sleeping, and I know she doesn't have much time left. But I'll never forget the way she protected me all those years ago, the way she stood between me and whatever was in that closet. She's the reason I can sleep at night, the reason I don't feel that cold, prickling fear as much anymore. I like to think she scared it off, that whatever it was, it's gone for good. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows are long, I still feel it. Watching, waiting, and I wonder if it ever really left. The thing is, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural or the paranormal or any of that stuff. But I do believe in the power of the mind, in the way it can play tricks on you, in the way it can make you see things that aren't there. And maybe that's all this is, just a series of coincidences, of weird family stories, of overactive imaginations. But there's a part of me that can't shake the feeling that it's more than that. That there's something else, something I can't explain, something that's been there all along. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, no matter how much I try to convince myself it's nothing, I can't escape the fear. The fear that one day it'll come back. And this time, Monroe won't be there to protect me. I had come down from Minnesota to Iowa to stay with my sister for a while. She had a small room off her bedroom, one she used as a library and a nursery for her daughter. It wasn't much, but she set me and my 5-year-old daughter up in there with an air mattress. I was about 6 months pregnant at the time with my youngest, and I appreciated having a place to rest, even if the room made me uncomfortable. There was something off about it, something that unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the sloping ceiling that reminded me of an attic, making the space feel too closed in. Or maybe it was the huge picture window at the far end of the room, looming over everything. Either way, it made my skin crawl. That night, I lay on the air mattress with my daughter curled up beside me. The baby inside me was particularly active, kicking up a storm. I was spooning my daughter, and I worried the baby's movements might wake her. Carefully, I tried to shift my weight, rolling over as slowly as possible on the wobbly surface of the airbed. It took a while, but eventually, I settled into a position that was more comfortable, my arm draped protectively over my little girl. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering in through that massive window. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was the feeling of my daughter shifting behind me. The bed was small, and there wasn't much room to move, so when I no longer felt her warmth pressed against me, I instinctively reached behind to check on her. My hand met empty space. My heart skipped a beat. The blankets were still there, still bunched up, but she wasn't under them. My pulse picked up as I struggled to turn over again, my belly making movements slow and clumsy. I scanned the room, my vision adjusting to the dim light. Then I saw her. She was standing in front of the picture window, her small frame outlined by the yellowish glow of the streetlights outside. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring out. My stomach twisted. Something about the way she stood, so still, so quiet, made a deep unease creep up my spine. It wasn't normal. It didn't feel right. I tried to call out to her, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. Finally, I managed a whisper. A strained, shaky whisper. "Come back to bed." She didn't move, didn't react. She just sighed. A deep, weary sigh that didn't belong to a child. Then she jumped, straight through the window. The shattering of glass exploded through the room, a deafening sound that snapped me out of whatever half-conscious state I had been in. My body jolted as if I had been electrocuted, my lungs sucking in a ragged breath. My hands clawed at the blankets, at the empty space beside me. My entire body was consumed with a raw, overwhelming terror, a desperation so intense it made my chest feel like it was caving in. I turned, wild, frantic, only to find my daughter still lying next to me, her tiny chest rising and falling with the even rhythm of sleep. She was there, right there. Everything was fine. There was no broken glass, no cold night air rushing in, no sickening drop through the darkness outside. Just a dream. Just a dream. I lay there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs from the inside. My hands were shaking, my skin slick with sweat. I could still feel that moment, still see it, like a brand burned into my mind. The way she stood, the way she sighed, the way she stepped forward so deliberately, as if she had no doubts, no fear. The way she just disappeared into the night. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't let go of the feeling it left behind. That sickening fear, that grief that clamped onto me like a vice in those few seconds. It felt too real, too raw. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes without seeing that image again. Every time I drifted, it was there waiting for me. The sound of the glass, the empty space beside me, the feeling of sheer helplessness as I watched her fall. When morning finally came, I moved through the motions in a daze. My daughter woke up happy, oblivious, chattering about something random as I helped her change. I tried to shake off the remnants of the dream, but it clung to me like a second skin. That day, I avoided the room as much as I could. I stayed out in the main areas of the house, distracting myself with conversation, with chores, with anything that kept my mind occupied. But when night came again, and I had no choice but to lay back down in that same spot, I found myself unable to relax. I stared at the window, the massive thing that had felt so unnervingly present in my nightmare. It looked the same as ever, unbroken, untouched. I tried to tell myself that's all it had been, a dream, nothing more. But in the pit of my stomach, something still twisted uncomfortably. I never told my sister about it. I never really told anyone. But I never slept well in that room again. And to this day, even years later, I can still see it so vividly. The streetlights outlining her small frame, the sigh that didn't sound like hers, and the way she just jumped. It was a couple of years back, probably when I was 26. It was late at night, and the house was quiet. Everyone was asleep in their rooms, my parents just behind the wall, my siblings in their own spaces. I had fallen asleep like any other night, nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. But something about that night still sticks with me, burned into my mind like a memory I can't shake no matter how much time passes. I remember waking up suddenly. Not the slow, groggy wake-up where you stretch and shift around, but an abrupt, unnatural kind of awakening. My eyes just opened. There was no dream I could recall, nothing that had startled me awake, just this eerie sensation that I had snapped out of sleep for no reason. I blinked, lying there in the dim room, thinking for a second that maybe I had a bad dream and just couldn't remember it. Oh well, I thought, and I tried to roll over. That's when I realized I couldn't move. At first, I didn't panic. I just thought maybe I had slept in a weird position, or my body hadn't fully woken up yet. But as the seconds passed, the realization hit me harder. My arms wouldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. My fingers wouldn't even twitch. I was just stuck. Then came the weight. It was like something was pressing down on my chest, heavy, suffocating. My breathing became shallow, my heart pounding so fast I could feel it thumping against my ribs. It wasn't just the weight itself that terrified me. It was the feeling that it wasn't coming from my own body. It felt foreign, unnatural, like something unseen was pressing me down, refusing to let me move. It wasn't pain, but it was something worse. It was the feeling of complete helplessness. I tried to force my body to move. I focused on my fingers, tried to wiggle them, tried to shift my legs even the slightest bit. Nothing. It was as if my mind was awake, but my body had been left behind in sleep. My breathing got even shorter, more uneven. I felt like I was being pinned down by something I couldn't see, something I couldn't fight against. I wanted to scream. I needed to. I could see the wall beside me, knew my parents were right behind it, knew that if I could just make a sound, they'd come rushing in, flip on the lights, shake me awake, and this nightmare would end. But my mouth wouldn't open. My throat felt locked, like something was holding it closed. My eyes darted around the room, the only part of me I could control. I looked toward the ceiling, then toward the right, toward the wall separating me from my parents' room. I tried again to call out, to make any kind of noise, but nothing came. My chest felt heavier by the second. It didn't just feel physical anymore, it felt wrong. I thought, this isn't real. This can't be real. But it was. I could feel the cold air in the room. I could hear the faint hum of the fan in the corner. I could see the faint light coming in through the window from the street outside. Everything around me was real, completely normal. And yet, my body refused to respond, as if I were trapped in some invisible prison within my own room. Panic set in. My breathing turned shallow, almost gasps. My heart was slamming against my ribcage now, my mind racing with thoughts that made everything worse. Was I dying? Was something actually on top of me? Was there something in the room that I couldn't see? I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything like that, but in that moment, logic didn't matter. I just wanted it to stop. I gathered every ounce of strength in my body and focused on one thing, making a sound. I didn't care if it was a whisper, a grunt, a wheeze, anything that might break this paralysis and bring me back to reality. And then suddenly it happened. My body jolted awake and a loud, strained noise escaped my throat, half a gasp, half a choked cry. Air rushed into my lungs, my chest free from whatever weight had been holding me down. My limbs twitched violently, as if they were snapping back into my control all at once. My heart was still racing, my breath coming in quick, uneven bursts. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, drenched in sweat, my body trembling. My mind was still trying to make sense of what had just happened. It didn't feel like a dream, didn't feel like something my mind had made up. It felt real, too real. I wanted to sit up, turn on the light, do something to shake off the lingering fear. But I was exhausted, completely drained. It was like whatever had happened had taken all the energy out of me. I wanted to stay awake, to make sure it wouldn't happen again, but sleep was pulling me under too fast. My body was still buzzing with leftover fear, but my exhaustion was stronger. Before I knew it, my eyelids grew heavy, and I let sleep take over again. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight was filtering through my blinds, painting my room in soft, golden light. Everything looked normal. My fan was still humming, my blankets were slightly rumpled. The door was still closed like it had been the night before. There was no sign that anything had happened, no proof of the terrifying experience I had gone through. But I knew it had happened. I could still feel the remnants of fear clinging to me, still hear the sound of my own strained gasp from the night before. I didn't tell anyone about it. What would I even say? That I woke up, couldn't move, and felt like something was sitting on my chest? That I had been awake, but paralyzed in my own bed? I knew it sounded ridiculous, even if it had been the most real thing I had ever felt. But I never forgot it. Even now, years later, the memory is still clear in my mind, as if it happened just last night. The feeling of helplessness, the weight pressing down, the pure terror of being trapped in my own body, it never faded. Since that night, I learned something. I never sleep flat on my back anymore. I always sleep on my side now, curled up just enough that my body feels grounded. I don't know if it actually helps, but it makes me feel safer. I never want to experience that again. Ever. I was very young, maybe 5 or 6 when this happened, and I used to go to bed really early. My parents had always been strict about bedtime, and I never questioned it. I would go to bed around 6 or 7 in the evening, which meant that sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, fully rested, but confused about why everything was so dark and quiet. It was a strange feeling, being awake when no one else was. The whole house would feel different, like it wasn't even the same place I lived in during the day. At the time, my bedroom had a hardwood floor because my parents were in the process of getting new carpeting for it. The floor was dark brown, and I remember thinking how smooth and shiny it was. I liked how cool it felt under my feet when I would get up in the morning, and I liked the way my toys made a little clattering sound when I dropped them onto it. It was a small room with a twin-sized bed pushed up against one wall and a dresser against the other. There was a small bookshelf near the corner, filled with books my mom would read to me at night, and a closet with a sliding door that I never liked to leave open. The window was high up, too high for me to see out of without standing on my bed, and it always had the same white curtains that my mom would pull shut every night before tucking me in. That night, like many others, I woke up. It must have been late, but I didn't know how to tell time yet, so I had no idea. All I knew was that it was dark and quiet, and I wasn't tired anymore. I had this habit of deciding it was time to play whenever I woke up at night. My parents were always telling me to go back to sleep, but when I was awake, I felt like I should be doing something. So I turned on the little lamp by my bed and grabbed my favorite toys, setting them up in a neat half circle in front of me. I pulled a book from the stack on my dresser and started to pretend to read to them, flipping the pages and making up a story the way I had seen my mom do so many times before. I don't remember what the story was about. It wasn't important. What I do remember is getting to the end of the book, looking at my toys as if to check that they were following along, and then noticing something move out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head slowly to the left, and that's when I saw it. From the narrow gap between my bed and the wall, an adult-sized hand was rising up, slow and deliberate. I froze. My mind didn't know what to do with what I was seeing. The hand had long fingers, slightly curled as they lifted into view, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it wasn't a normal hand. It was made of wood, the same wood as my floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My eyes were locked onto it, watching as it rose just high enough to be fully visible before it stopped. For a moment, it just hovered there, as if it was waiting for me to do something. Then, just as slowly as it had come, it began to descend back under my bed, disappearing into the darkness. The moment it was gone, I sprang up from my bed and ran out of my room as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was in my parents' room, diving onto their bed and burying myself between them. My mother woke up first, startled by the sudden movement, but my father took longer to stir. When he finally did, he was annoyed, groggy and grumbling as he asked what was wrong. I tried to tell them, but the words wouldn't come out right. My voice was shaking, and my whole body felt like it was still frozen in that moment, staring at the hand as it crept out from under my bed. My mother believed me. She always did. She rubbed my back, told me it was okay, but my father wasn't convinced. He kept saying it must have been a dream, that there was no way what I was saying could be real. He even got up, walked to my room, and checked under the bed himself, coming back with that same tired look on his face, telling me there was nothing there. But I knew what I had seen. I knew I hadn't imagined it. For weeks after that, I refused to sleep in my own bed. My mother let me sleep on a small mattress on the floor of their room, but my father kept insisting that I needed to go back. Eventually, I did, but I never felt safe in that room again. Every night, I would check the gap between my bed and the wall before climbing in, and even after I convinced myself there was nothing there, I could never shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then, a couple of weeks later, something else happened. I had finally started to sleep better, convincing myself that maybe my father had been right all along, that it was just a dream. But one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I saw movement again. This time, it wasn't a hand. It was a shadow. It moved across my wall like it had a mind of its own, stretching unnaturally before stopping near the center of the wall. And then it waved at me. I didn't run that time. I couldn't. I just pulled the blankets over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for morning to come. When the sun finally rose, I pulled the covers down slowly and looked at the wall. There was nothing there. No sign that anything had happened. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew deep down that whatever it wasn't done with me yet. After a successful hunt, my father, his childhood friend, and I field-dressed a large doe and a juvenile buck. The cold air bit at my exposed fingers as we worked, our breath forming clouds that hung in the still evening air. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the damp, earthy smell of the woods. Our ATV, an old but reliable workhorse, sat nearby with its small, trailer-like bed attached to the rear. The bed was already stained dark with blood from previous hunts, but tonight the pool of fresh, warm blood glistened under the dimming sky. My father, tired from the long day, said he'd clean it in the morning. The next afternoon, the temperature had dropped even further, settling into that deep, biting cold that seeped into your bones. I took the ATV out to drop my father off at a tree stand near a creek before heading to my own. The sky was a dull gray, promising an early nightfall. I drove carefully over the uneven terrain, the ATV grumbling beneath me as it bounced over frozen roots and patches of ice. The air smelled of winter, damp wood, distant smoke, and something crisp and metallic. I climbed into my stand and settled in, watching the woods stretch out in all directions. Hours passed, the sun slipping lower and lower until the light was almost gone. No movement, no sound of rustling leaves or breaking twigs. Just an endless, suffocating silence. As the last of the light faded, I climbed down, careful not to make too much noise, though I knew the woods were already empty tonight. I swung a leg over the ATV and started the short ride back to the creek to meet my father. The tires crunched over frost-coated leaves, and every sound felt magnified in the absence of wind or wildlife. I parked at the creek's edge and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than before, pressing in from all sides. I crossed my arms, leaned back, and tried to think warm thoughts as I waited for my father to emerge from the trees. My breath curled in front of me in small, white clouds. Then, from directly behind me, a howl split the air. It wasn't distant. It wasn't the kind of mournful call that coyotes usually made when they were in packs, calling to one another across the ridgelines. This was close, very close, and it sounded big. Every muscle in my body locked up. My breath caught in my throat, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The ATV was dead silent, the woods just as still. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just the ringing cold and the echo of that howl still bouncing in my skull. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to think. My rifle, my best defense, was in the bed of the ATV behind me. My pistol was back at the cabin. All I had was a knife buried deep in my pocket, barely accessible with my fingers stiff from the cold. I reached for my phone. My hands shook as I hit the power button, the screen flashing to life and illuminating the space around me in a weak, bluish glow. I whipped it around, shining the light toward the back of the ATV, and that's when I saw them, eyes. Large, yellow eyes, reflecting the phone's light from just beyond the tailgate. A coyote, but not just any coyote. This one was bigger than any I'd seen before, its head low, body stiff, ears pricked forward. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the blood pooled in the bed of the ATV. My father had said he'd clean it off in the morning, but I hadn't thought about what that meant in a place like this. Blood meant food. Food meant predators. The coyote's lips curled back slightly, exposing sharp, yellowed teeth. Its body language wasn't right. Coyotes were usually skittish around humans. They might circle, they might watch, but they didn't approach like this, not unless they were starving or sick. I barely breathed. The phone's glow cast flickering shadows against the ATV's bed, making the blood look almost black. The coyote's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, then reached toward the tailgate to lap at the blood. I don't know if it was the sudden movement of my arm or the faint sound of the phone slipping from my grip, but in that split second, the coyote jerked its head up and locked eyes with me. Then I dropped the phone. It hit the frozen ground hard, the plastic casing shattering on impact. The light flickered and went out, plunging me back into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. The silence stretched on, stretching thinner and thinner, like an old rope ready to snap. Then nothing. No sound of paws crunching leaves, no growl, no snap of teeth. I stayed perfectly still, listening, my heart hammering in my chest. Had it run? I strained my ears, listening. Nothing. Not even the faintest sound of movement. Slowly, painfully, I reached back toward the bed of the ATV, fingers searching for the cold steel of my rifle. The moment my fingertips brushed the stock, a branch snapped in the darkness to my right. Not far at all. My pulse surged, and I yanked the rifle into my lap, fumbling to find the safety in the dark. Another snap, this time farther away. Then another, and another. Not running, not charging, just moving, circling. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine despite the freezing air. My hands trembled as I gripped the rifle, knuckles white. I wanted to turn the key, fire up the ATV, and get the hell out of there, but I knew how these woods worked. A bad move in panic could mean rolling into a ditch or slamming into a tree. I breathed in, slow and steady, willing my hands to stop shaking. My father had to be close by now. He had to have heard that first howl. If he wasn't already on his way back, he'd be wondering why I hadn't turned the ATV back on yet. I swallowed, steadying myself. My eyes darted back to where the coyote had been. Empty darkness. Then, from the tree line, just beyond the edge of my vision, another howl. This one was farther away, but not by much. And then, just like that, it was over. A rustle in the underbrush, a flicker of movement at the corner of my vision, and then nothing but the heavy, suffocating silence again. I sat there, rifle clutched tight, waiting. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Finally, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. My father's silhouette appeared at the edge of the creek, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Cold night," he murmured as he climbed onto the ATV. I forced a nod, my throat dry. "Yeah." I started the engine. The sound felt deafening after so much silence. My hands were still shaking as I turned the ATV around and headed back toward the cabin, headlights carving a path through the darkness. I didn't tell him what had happened. Didn't tell him about the coyote, about the howl, about the way the woods had felt wrong. But the next morning, when I went outside, I noticed something. The blood in the ATV bed was gone. Not just licked up. Gone. Like it had never been there in the first place. The wind had picked up overnight, covering the ground in a fresh layer of leaves and frost. But there, just beneath the trailer, pressed deep into the frozen earth. Tracks. Not just one set. Multiple. Circling. Waiting. Watching. I go urban exploring sometimes. Old hospitals, abandoned theme parks, forgotten factories, places that have been left to rot. It's a mix of curiosity and adrenaline, like stepping into a time capsule that the world has chosen to forget. This time, we were checking out an abandoned hospital, one that held a strange connection to me. This was the place where my mom first found out she was pregnant with me. That fact alone gave me a weird feeling about the whole trip, but I wasn't going to back out. Before we even got there, I had taken a few hits of acid. Or maybe it was mushroom chocolates, possibly peyote. I don't remember exactly, but I know I was tripping by the time we arrived. Colors felt a little off. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and the whole world had a strange, fluid quality. I could still keep my cool, though. I've tripped enough times to handle myself. We pulled up to the hospital late at night. The building was massive, just a giant decaying structure sitting in the dark. Windows were shattered, and parts of the outer walls were crumbling. The air smelled like old concrete, mildew, and something metallic. We had to climb through a broken window to get inside, stepping into pure darkness. The floor was covered in debris, broken tiles, and old medical papers scattered everywhere. The deeper we went, the more eerie it felt. There were 6 of us, me, my girlfriend, a couple we were close with, and 2 other people we didn't know too well. We started moving through the hallways, flashlights bouncing against the peeling walls, illuminating old patient rooms that had been torn apart. Some still had hospital beds in them, rusted and covered in grime. Others were empty except for graffiti-covered walls and broken glass. One of the first weird things we found was a huge pile of what looked like cut-off dreadlocks. Just a tangled mess of hair sitting in the middle of a room. It didn't make any sense. Who the hell leaves a pile of hair like that? It was one of those things that creeps you out but doesn't have a logical explanation, so you just keep moving. As we walked through one of the main hallways, everything was completely destroyed. Scrappers had ripped out most of the walls, leaving behind exposed wiring and jagged metal edges. The ceiling was half collapsed in some areas, insulation hanging down like rotten flesh. At the end of the hall, we saw 5 figures just standing there. For a solid few seconds, we were frozen. Their faces were blacked out, just hollow voids where their eyes and mouths should be. My heart felt like it stopped. Then, as we moved closer, we realized what it was. It was a wooden wall with the cast of M.A.S.H. painted on it. One of those old carnival-style boards with holes cut out for people to put their faces through. Except this one was just left here, rotting. The holes where faces should be looked like deep pits in the dark. The way our lights hit, it made it look like actual people standing there at first. We laughed it off, but there was still this weird feeling in the air, like the building itself didn't want us there. We explored the entire hospital, going through different floors, checking out rooms filled with old equipment, some of it still intact but covered in dust. The boiler room, though, was by far the creepiest. The second we stepped down there, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the darkness or the damp smell. There were sounds. Weird, distant sounds, like metal scraping on metal, like something moving just out of sight. Then we made our way to the morgue. That was the whole reason we came here. Someone had the bright idea to bring a Ouija board, which wasn't my thing, but I wasn't going to be the one to back out. The room itself was freezing. It was already cold outside, but this was different. The air had a sharpness to it, like it was biting into your skin. The morgue had those old, rusted metal slabs where bodies used to be stored, and some of the doors were still hanging open. The idea of bodies once being here, just lying on these cold slabs, made the whole thing feel heavier. We set up in the middle of the room, right on the dirty tile floor. The Ouija board looked out of place here, like something that belonged at a sleepover, not in an actual morgue. But we started anyway. The second we put our hands on the planchette, the air seemed to get even colder. I was still tripping, so everything already felt unreal. But this was something else. The planchette started moving almost immediately. I tried to tell myself someone was pushing it, but my hands felt light, like I wasn't even really controlling them. The board started saying weird shit. It spelled out warnings, saying something was going to follow us home. It kept telling us to be afraid of him, whatever that meant. I wasn't a big believer in the whole Ouija thing, but I couldn't shake the way it made me feel, like we had crossed some kind of line by even being here. After that, we wrapped things up. The trip had been insane, but we had seen some really cool stuff. The hospital itself was incredible, a decayed piece of history frozen in time. But as we left, that weird feeling stuck with me, like we had disturbed something, even if it wasn't supernatural. Maybe it was just the drugs, maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I felt watched. The entire way back to the car, it was like the hospital was still breathing behind me, waiting for me to turn around. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept thinking about that morgue, about what the board had said. Nothing happened, nothing followed us home, but that doesn't mean I didn't feel it. Some places don't need ghosts to be haunted. Some places just are.